literally parrot the line that got us in this position in the first place.
I know.
I mean, you can't make that up. And he's got advisors around him, but clearly he's
They're not very good,
not
though,
that
are they?
bothered about it.
I know. It is such an extraordinary story that this is the row that we are having at the beginning of the new year.
Unreal.
And you say, and the criticism is exactly the same as what got us into this mess. What else are you talking about?
Your old man's just sent me a text. Apparently it's an Audi.
It's not an Audi. I know it's not an Audi. I love the idea of my
I love the fact you don't know what car you're in.
Well,
you know, when you get, is there a
it's the
symbol
thing,
on the
it's a big
steering
one,
wheel? Is there one
anyway,
of
I
those?
don't know. Anyway, thanks, Claire. Ian Collins is up next. I'm going to go find out what my car is. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Turns out it's a Ford Fiesta, after all. There you go, who knew? 3 minutes after 1 o'clock. Yes, welcome to the home of common sense. Lots to get through in the next few hours. As I was mentioning to Julia, wind provided more electricity than ever last year as the UK moved further away from fossil fuels to power the nation. This is according to new data. So is the green argument right after all? Of all the swiping and the hooing and the harring we've all been doing, and I've put myself in that group, are they right? Is green the future? What's going on there? Details on the way. Also this afternoon, as you've been hearing, Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick has linked the grooming gang scandal to mass migration, criticising medieval attitudes to women among some immigrants. I've been saying this for absolutely years. Does a 6-year-old could work this one out? For some reason, it's a bit delicate. It puts you on the, what's that phrase? The far-right bandwagon. Nice one, Keir. And a veteran jazz teacher has been cancelled by a prestigious music school after claiming there's no systemic racial inequality in the UK jazz scene. Apparently they didn't like those words. No, please make there be some racial inequality in jazz, of all things. Well, he lost his gig as a result. More on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. You can drop us a voice note as well, 87222. Can I just throw that question out there? I'd like your help on this. Is the Green argument right after all? After all is said and done, and we will speak to various voices on this who can sort of illuminate different parts of the argument. I have scratched, of all the things that we debate on a regular basis, I mean, Brexit comes up once in a while, but for years it was clearly a daily thing. In 2016, that's all we talked about every day. It was Brexit. Immigration, of course, is the top of the list. The one that has always left me scratching my head with sheer frustration, if nothing else, has been the Green argument. And all that surrounds the Green argument, the inconsistencies, the basic lack of urgency for something that's meant to end planet Earth. I make this example every single time. You know, we close down the world because of the virus, because of the COVID. Close down the planet, pretty much. And yet here's something called the end of the world, as in the environment, the environmental catastrophe. And actually, if you drill down, no pun, there is a very casual approach. You can still buy the 4x4 cars. You can buy as many as you like. Yes, that fella that runs London, Mr. Sir Sadiq, has, you know, he's got his cameras to try and find 350 people who might be driving the wrong car. But if you want to pay for it, you can still pollute. There's all of these things, you know, plane travel. The list goes on. It just seems like a madness to me. However, is it possible that the Greenies were right all along? You can power a nation without the need for oil or to frack or to do all that horrible stuff. Wind provided more electricity than ever last year in the UK as we move further away from planet-warming fossil fuels to power the nation. That is the headline on the BBC's website. Just note the editorialisation of that first phrase, from planet-warming fossil fuels. These are their words. But we do know that wind generated 83 terawatt hours of electricity across the United Kingdom. This is England, Wales and Scotland. That is up significantly from 2023. Electricity generation from major fossil fuel power stations fell to just over a quarter of the total of last year, as other renewables like solar also rose along with electricity imports. Now, of course, the aim by 2030 is to get to a stage where fossil fuels account for less than 5% of electricity. But now we have a situation where it's been a record year for wind power, which has overtaken everything. Therefore, is it right to say the Green lobby have won this particular argument? We can power a nation with the wind and the sun. Have we all been getting it wrong in the hysteria, in the contradictions, in the hypocrisy, in the myriad of arguments around this? Has the fact of the matter been staring us in the face? If you fire up enough windmills, that sucker will give you energy. Oh, it'll provide you with everything you need for a healthy, beautiful, green, efficient home. 0344 499 1000. I'm also going to ask you, because once in a while we talk about this, we do get callers that have solar panels on their house. It's always still strange, isn't it, when you spot a house with solar panels? It's like back in the day when you first spotted a house with a satellite dish. Or go back a little bit, a squarial. Remember those things that lasted about half an hour? And solar panels still has that, you know, there's a couple near me, but it's only a couple. And I guess they've been there a long, long time. If you are one of those people that do generate your own power because of solar panels, how does that work? And I think Elon Musk isn't one of his many, many, many projects selling kind of the unique Acme home domestic solar panel kit, where it will store energy as well. Thoughts on this one? 0344 499 1000. Is the green argument right, after all, when it comes to powering our homes? Let's speak with Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster, to help us out on this and a few of the other big stories of the day as well. Candice, afternoon to you. Literally at that moment, she dropped off. I think the wind turbines stopped turning, and so we lost a guest as a result. Neil says, whilst wind has performed well and generating about 32% of electricity, solar is pathetic at around about 4%. So why continue down the path of solar? I think, Neil, because Ed Miliband is just like throwing everything at it, right? Rich says, a lack of charging points is never my problem. It's the speed of chargers, as the grid cannot cope with 6 cars on chargers, even beside a power station. It's twice the price of petrol on the public charging network, and if you are clever, can use car as a battery for the house. About all it's good for. Fair point. And one here from Peter. Pete says, good afternoon, great show. We all have electric cars. The cheap off-peak tariffs will disappear as sure as eggs are eggs. You're absolutely right. And you consider, you know, at the moment, the lack of road tax, we know that's going to kind of creep in. It'll be no cheaper to drive your electric car. And some will argue, in terms of the environment and the roads, more destructive, as in the carbon footprint. Candice is back. Well, I say you're back with us, Candice. We never got to speak to you at all. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Technology is against us.
Well, you see, I had an image that you had a windmill on your roof and it stopped turning at that point. So that's why we were cut off. So wind turbines apparently overtaken gas as Britain's most used source of energy. Around about 29-30% of UK's electricity last year was produced this way. It's worth having a reminder, Candice, of when Ed Miliband met with Chris Stark. He's the head of the new Mission Control for Clean Power. Their idea was to promote clean energy and the wind turbines that are being built. In this particular case, it was in Hull. You've never heard two people get more excited about wind and windmills as this. Have a listen.
As we walk the length of this 108-metre wind turbine blade without hesitation, deviation or repetition about clean energy. Chris?
Look at the size of this thing. This monster is going to be in the seas around this country generating clean electricity in the next few months. It is amazing to see the extent of what we're doing in this country.
And what's so exciting about this is it's about energy security and lower bills. It's about tackling the climate crisis, and it's about good jobs for people here in Hull. 1,300 jobs from the manufacture at this plant. I mean, you do see the future being built here, don't you?
You do. I mean, what's not to like, really?
Trisha, who works here, said to me, every blade makes a difference.
Yeah, Trisha didn't say that at all. I thought it was a bit mean, Candice, as well, to get his special advisor to walk behind him playing a drum like that, didn't you? That was a kind of curious request, I think, from a senior politician. But there it is, Hull, the epicentre of all things that rotate. Wind power is the future. And now, apparently, here's the proof.
Yeah. I mean, reading... Ed Miliband has an ideological fervour when it comes to this. And I just don't, and I think most ordinary consumers of energy don't. All we want is reliability and affordability, and that's all we care about. If it was actually true that wind and solar could provide for all of our energy needs without us having huge energy bills, I think people would be on board with it. But we do know that there is that intermittency issue. So when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, we have to rely on gas. And we import a lot of gas, and we pay very high prices for that imported gas. And, you know, I see that in this video, Ed Miliband does address certain issues. Like, for instance, he says that they're going to, these new clean energies are going to create lots of jobs, because we know there's going to be a huge loss of jobs in places like the North Sea or in the manufacturing of cars. And, you know, people are starting to realize that those sort of good, well-paid jobs will be one of the casualties of net zero.
What I don't get, and this will probably sound to those that work in the energy sector, a very naive question. I know you have to pay for the infrastructure and it's very expensive to get all of those windmills up and running, but surely this essentially was free energy. I mean, it came from the wind. So why did our bills not go down by a significant amount if we are powering the country, a third of the country, from wind? What's happened there? It didn't cost a bean for the wind. I mean, you might have paid to build the things, but the energy itself was free.
Yes. Well, no country has managed to solve it. I mean, Denmark, I think, which mainly uses clean energy, still hasn't brought bills down. I mean, the fact of the matter is that a lot of the stuff is massively subsidized as well. We're still subsidizing it through our taxes. And, you know, I think you were speaking earlier with Julia, and you were saying that we're going to be using even more electricity now that electric vehicles are sort of being mandated. 2030. So the demands on the grid are only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
There's no doubt about that. And that's likely to be the big kind of crossroads they kind of hit. Once the kind of rubber hits the road, as it were, and this is wheeled out, you know, in a sort of almost industrial scale fashion, as we're likely to see. We've heard about charging points. They're going to massively increase those across the country over the next couple of years. But you wonder whether it's still going to hit some kind of bump in the road. We'll watch with interest, as we always seem to say. Let's move to this one, Candice. Robert Jenrick suggesting the Tories could seek to limit immigration to the UK from what he described as alien cultures. Of course, Mr Jenrick stood to be Tory leader, but he's now the Shadow Justice Secretary. He said this morning, we've seen millions of people enter the UK in recent years. Some of them have backward, frankly, medieval attitudes to women. This comes following that row over Labour's handling of the grooming gang scandal. Let's have a listen to what Keir Starmer said yesterday when taking questions from the media on the situation.
And when politicians, and I mean politicians, who sat in government for many years, are casual about honesty, decency, truth and the rule of law, calling for inquiries because they want to jump on a bandwagon of the far right, then that affects politics, because a robust debate can only be based on the true facts.
And you can only call for an inquiry if you're far right, apparently, Candice. I mean, that was just one of the most appalling things in a long list of appalling things I've heard Keir Starmer say. I mean, that was almost in another league.
Everything is far right. It just seems to be the standard stock response to everything, and it shows the prism through which, you know, this Labour government views the world. And I think it's quite an outdated prism. And I think what he's failing to do is to respond to the moment. And we're in a very interesting moment. I feel like a lot of the talk about immigration in the past was about economics. But now what Robert Jenrick is bringing in is the idea of integration. I mean, and certain people with certain beliefs about women in particular, after all this stuff about Rotherham, fully integrate into our society, and we should have placed much greater expectations on them to do so. I mean, I think it, you know, once again, I'm referring what you were saying to Julia, it is crazy where we are just a few days into the new year and we're already having these incredibly intense conversations about things. The reason is because we've never had them before.
That's very true, and there is something that's sort of, you know, thank goodness about it all, in that we can now talk about this. But I don't know why there would be such resistance that if you import a group of people from countries where their track record on either human rights and certainly women's rights are non-existent, who have come to the UK, they see young girls, they see women as second-class citizens, full stop, particularly young Western girls, young British Western girls. It's white trash, they're easy targets, they're easy meat, they're all of those horrible words that, you know, I won't even say out loud. That is the perception, you know, and these people have come from areas where that is the perception, that is their reality, that's what they think. And then we're scratching our head. But that's what I wanted to hear Keir Starmer say. I wanted to hear him say, do you know what, as a result of this, I'd like to get a message out to people whose communities were looking after the perpetrators. And I want to say in the strongest possible terms, we know where you are, we're looking for you, we know that this can never happen again, even though the smart money says it's still going on. That's the sort of thing I want to hear a Prime Minister say, not write the whole thing off as almost a right-wing conspiracy, which is precisely how the problem began in the first place.
Well, exactly. But, you know, has Labour, bar a few exceptions, of course, really evolved on this issue, or has that same attitude that enabled all this abuse to carry on? Does it still prevail within Labour? And I would say it does. I mean, I think there were a few Labour MPs at the time, like Sarah Champion and Cryer, from those areas who tried to call this out, were actually very straight talking about it. They were completely marginalised by their colleagues. I mean, they were shut down as racist. And I don't think that attitude has gone away. There's still this terrible fear. There's still this terrible blocker. They think the big problems in the world are caused by the far right. And it sounds completely oversimplistic and ridiculous, but that's the paradigm. That's the philosophical paradigm that they operate in.
There it is. Listen, stay with us, Candice. We're going to talk some more to Candice Holdsworth. A couple of other stories we want to throw in as well, particularly the jazz teacher cancelled and trains cancelled as well for a slightly different reason. All of that and more on the way. Your calls and comments to 0344 499 1000. Particularly, I want to investigate that question as to whether the green argument was right all along when it comes to energy. If we're fueling this old nation of ours, Blighty is being fueled and energised by wind like never before, overtaking other forms of energy. Britain's most used source of energy. 30% of our energy came from the elements. Are we all wrong then to be cynical about the green agenda? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Lots to get through. 23 minutes after 1. Candice Holdsworth is with us, the writer and broadcaster. Let's talk about jazz, shall we? I mean, this isn't something that ordinarily would cross our desk, I don't think, Candice, but it's the jazz teacher Martin Speake who was told not to speak after he resigned from Trinity Conservatoire after questioning its Black Lives Matter and inclusivity policies. So he was essentially asked about racism within the jazz world, and he said that UK jazz lacked systemic racial inequality, arguing black musicians had more opportunities than others, but his comments led to student boycotts, a petition for his removal, because this is how life works now. We disagree with you, so your career should end. Let's have a listen to the man himself speaking to Talk this morning with Mike Graham.
I shared it with one student, an interesting student who we always chatted about all kinds of things, and I thought that's what you're supposed to do in the academic world with young adults, talk about interesting subjects. You know, you don't have to agree. And he shared it with a half dozen students, and one of those got anxious. I don't like what Martin's saying here, and went into the head of jazz, who was a friend of mine for 30 years, interestingly, and instead of calling me in, let's all talk about it, bypassed me, and the wheels of motion were set. And the students then heard about the email, although I hadn't seen it, and decided to boycott my lessons.
It's a funny old world we've ended up in, Candice. I mean, you know, part of us should just go, oh, how crazy, what a silly thing. But it isn't silly. No. It's deadly serious and hugely dangerous, as profoundly dangerous. You know, here's a man who's, you know, lost his gig as a result of some sort of, I was about to say snowflakey students, but it's more than that, you know, insane thinking that has somehow got a stranglehold on some areas of academia. And here's a cast iron example of it.
You would be amazed in so many of the fine arts, like music and just the art world in general, and of course academia, I mean, is terrible, how much woke dogma stifles people's thinking and how terrified people are to express any opinion dissenting from that. I mean, I know people who, during the whole BLM era, you know, the big crisis, they didn't dare say anything criticizing, because they knew that they would be marginalized instantly. And you think about a lot of these students, how old they are now, maybe they're between the ages of 19 and 21. I mean, a lot of their views on how you should deal with this stuff will have been formed during that time, and it would have been formed during that very censorious time. Sure. So we've educated young people to behave like this, and we've infantilized them. I mean, to shut a conversation down because it makes you feel anxious, I mean, that is a form of tyranny. It really, really, really is. And it creates a very low trust environment where people just cannot speak their minds. And that is so limiting, because you think about jazz and the arts and all these things, you know, we associate them with free expression, the place where you go to be free and to be avant-garde. I mean, that's what these movements were. I mean, the history of jazz is that it is one of the most egalitarian art forms. I mean, its emergence in the US coincided very much with civil rights. I mean, black musicians. You think about someone like Miles Davis, for instance. I mean, he was given the opportunity to create music and to show people exactly how a black man should be treated equally to everybody else. I mean, the early jazz clubs didn't care what color you were. As long as you could play music, that's what was important. But we're re-racializing society in a sort of inverted way.
Right. Well, that's the bit I don't understand. I mean, it's almost as if, you know, no, you can't have that. You have to have the other view, whether it's true or not. You have to have a different opinion to the one you have. So having an opinion is no good. Even if it was proven that somehow he was wrong on his opinion, you still don't fire a guy for having an opinion.
No, and I'm just wondering, you know, if we're starting to move more towards instead of relying on social convention for free speech, we're going to have much stricter legal protections. I mean, I know he is looking at this, kind of like the gender critical feminists had to go through the law to get their opinions protected at work. You know, maybe in all sorts of areas now we're going to have to do that, because I think that those social conventions have broken down, which is very sad. You know, where you live in a society where people can just speak freely, you can express an opinion, you can have robust disagreement, but you don't demand the person is completely alienated from everyone else.
Just a quick mention for trains. Trains cancelled after the union told drivers not to walk in the snow. This is Avanti West Coast services between Liverpool and London. Hugely disrupted on Sunday after drivers refused to walk on snowy walkways. ASLEF deemed the Liverpool Edge Hill depot unsafe, citing snow and ice-covered paths, delaying train departures. So 10 trains were impacted, 14 cancellations, compensation claims from thousands of affected passengers because they thought, well, you know, it's snowy and that's clearly a health and safety issue if you walk in the snow. What the hell is wrong with these people?
Yes, and, you know, this is going to anger people, especially after all these bumper pay rises, and yet there was no there was no improvement in work practices or any commitment on the part of the unions for drivers to improve their productivity in any way. I mean, there was such an unskillfully negotiated settlement, and the government were incredibly poor custodians of public money. I mean, that is absurd. That is taking customers and people who use trains for a literal ride.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. And a final one here. Interesting, Meta, as in the Facebook owners, are ending its fact-checking programme after the big boss, Mark Zuckerberg, vows to restore free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I mean, this essentially is that Zuckerberg felt that Trump was coming for him, and now he's, well, attempting to turn himself into Elon Musk, I think.
This is huge. So this is actually a really massive thing, this sort of reshuffling. So Nick Clegg is out, this Josh Kaplan guy is in.
Yep.
And Zuckerberg is now speaking against basically algorithmic censorship on Facebook. It's actually something which is really of interest to me. I've been on Plank of the Week on talkTV a few times, nominating Facebook as the plank for exactly this, for journalists posting articles, someone reports it, you don't know what it is, vexatiously, maliciously, the bots come in, they shut it down, no questions asked, it's a completely opaque process, you don't know who's doing it, and it's so constraining for free expression. It's happened to me. Articles I have written have been shut down, completely shut down by just faceless people. And now, because the moment has shifted so much, and I think we really need to talk about this and think about this.
Yeah.
Now Zuckerberg sees that the wind is blowing in a different direction.
So is this, so essentially that the suggestion here seems to be that, you know, it's all very well having a fact-checking program. Sounds like a great thing, doesn't it? We've got a fact-checking program. But if the person programming the algorithm and the fact-checking program is skinny jean-wearing soy boy from the Silicon Valleys, then that's not a fact-checking program at all. That's just a censorship program.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just the very basic old saying, which is almost cliched but true. Who watches the Watchmen? You know, who are these people fact-checking? We need to know who they are. And I think that people really began to question this during COVID, because you had these people, these teams of people slapping content warnings and censoring discussion around COVID, who had already declared what their biases were. They weren't unbiased people, and in some cases they were shutting down, you know, scientists and researchers who were very knowledgeable on the issue. And also it goes against what science is. I mean, science is, people kind of associate it with lab coats and pipettes and stuff. It's not, it's a method, it's a way of updating your beliefs.
Yeah. There's no Petri dish involved in this process. There it is. Candice, thank you. Candice Holdsworth with us on the programme. Thank you to her. Over to you as well. We're talking wind farms. We're talking solar and the windmill stuff. We got Chris Morrison coming on, by the way. He's the environment editor at the Daily Sceptic. Really on top of this brief. However, it could be countered because everybody's favourite environmentalist, Donica McCarthy, is also going to pitch up, perhaps with a different view. And Donica's actually tried, I think I'm right in saying, I think he tried, with very little success, having a windmill on his own house. So we'll see what he has to say about that. But the question here, is the green argument right after all? Because apparently we are getting a big percentage, biggest chunk of our percentage of energy is coming from wind. Does that mean job done? We were all wrong to be sceptical. Let's find out what our guests have to say in just a couple of moments. Over to you as well, 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
So much comment on this one. Let's start with this from Mark in Sunbury. All I hear when listening to Ed Miliband is snake oil salesman. What is happening in our country scares me so much that I'm having my home valued today in preparation to move away, leaving before power shortages and the ideological police kick my door down, which we are seeing happen already. I'm a big tough guy, but this is breaking my heart. I'm resisting just the temptation to cry. I share that. We are living in I keep banging on about this upside down world, this topsy-turvy, black is white, night is day, kind of odd, skewered. I don't want to use the word Orwellian, because that's too easy. You shouldn't go there that quickly. But you're kind of forced into that cul-de-sac sometimes. Well, let's talk more about this. Wind turbines, though, this might be the news, Mark, that you need, Mark in Sunbury. Wind turbines have overtaken gas as Britain's biggest source of electricity. Wind accounted for 29% of our electricity last year, while gas tumbled to around about a quarter. In the previous year, gas was 32%. This comes as the number of public EV charging points grew by 35%, rising from 53,800 to 73,000 and counting. In a moment, we'll get a view from Donica McCarthy on this one, Director at Climate Media Coalition. First, Chris Morrison, Environment Editor at The Daily Sceptic. Afternoon to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, Ian.
So, is it fair to say that you and I, we've been, wondering about this sort of evangelical movement of wind turbines and solar panels? We got it wrong, apparently, Chris. We were wrong and the greenies were right. Is that what we extrapolate from this headline?
No, on the contrary. The more wind you put in, the more expensive the whole thing becomes. So this is actually very bad news if wind has actually edged ahead of gas. And the reason is, I'm sure when Donica comes on after me, he'll point out that, of course, it's going to be much, much cheaper. Well, if that's so, how come it needs £16 billion worth of subsidies directly on UK consumers' electricity bills. And that all goes to pay for this green energy. And the more that we put on, the more that price will go up. It gets worse, in fact. The National Grid's control operation have said in its latest report that it will take 44 to 48 billion pounds of extra spending if we want to go to a largely renewable grid. If you actually sort of extrapolate those figures out, there's a chap called David Turvey who works for Daily Skeptic. He also runs a very good subset, a retired engineer, a real whiz with the figures. He's worked out that the figures involved in upgrading the grid, in building these giant windmills, in the capital costs, in subsidising the electricity, all these things are going to cost £700 billion by 2050. Now, if you consider what it's replacing, which is a gas network, which is largely in place, which is cheap gas, whatever they tell you, is relatively cheap energy source. We're sitting on the stuff. We've got masses of the stuff, except, of course, the greenies have all stopped us fracking and drilling for oil. If you consider the damage that that's going to do to our economy, and of course, if you look again, people who argue that gas is much more expensive, why then, out of all the countries in the world that have gone down this ridiculous route of these ghastly wind turbines, Germany and now the UK, they have the highest energy prices in the world. Our energy prices are 3 times higher than they were in 2005 when we were a net exporter of energy. It is destroying our industry. It is destroying, ultimately, it's destroying our industrial base, and ultimately will destroy our society because there won't be any money for anything.
But here's the thing, though, Chris. We're saving the planet, right? I mean, the polar bears are safe. You and I and our kids and grandchildren can, watch them grow up in a safe, clean environment. That dirty old oil was only ever going to tear out their lungs. This is clean, so it might cost a few more quid, but we've got the windmills. And ultimately, when we've paid for the infrastructure, it'll be free.
Oh yes. Well, as I tried to suggest, it won't be free. It'll be horrendously expensive. But so let's put that to one side. Is there, and ultimately it comes down. And I think I said to you before on talk, if there is a problem, if it's an existential crisis, we have to do it. We have to get rid of hydrocarbons. It will take us back to almost a pre-industrial age, but we have to do it. And again, as I think I said, on the Daily Skeptic, we look at the science for that reason. And if you look, you will see that there isn't a climate crisis. Bad weather is not getting worse. A little bit of extra warming has helped food yields. The planet has greened at an astonishing rate, and it's actually greening much faster. We've had the Seychelles, for instance, the deserts, the southern Sahara, greening almost before our eyes. We've had food production double because of the use of hydrocarbons. And also we have had this other theory of carbon dioxide. It saturates at certain levels. So where we are now, 400 parts per million, we've been much higher in the past, and the temperatures have been lower. So there are other alternative scientific views and papers increasingly becoming, I wouldn't say mainstream, that would be too much. The BBC does all it can to avoid it. But certainly people are becoming much more aware, is there a real problem? Because if there isn't, we are bankrupting ourselves.
There it is, Chris. Thank you. Very thorough stuff from Chris Morrison, Environment Editor at the Daily Skeptic. Listening to that, Donica McCarthy, Director of the Climate Media Coalition. I wondered, Donica, if you might have put the phone down while you were listening to Chris, because he's done the job there, hasn't he? He's explained it, he's laid it out. There are no good arguments around this, and whatever we say about wind overtaking gas, it's going to cost us so much money, we're going to be bankrupt. We'll all die of starvation because we can't afford to buy anything. That's how bad it is. So I don't even know why you exist in this space anymore, Donica. What's happening?
It's terrible. Oh, my God. What a start to 2025. Oh, my God. We've got so much wind turbine. We've actually producing 30% of our energy now from wind. People like Chris Morrison 20 years ago said, wind turbines will never produce any energy. It will never produce a significant amount of energy. Here we are 20 years later, and 30% of our energy is coming from wind. It's proving what we said 10 years ago. I mean, we can't count anything that this guy says is serious. If he dismisses the agreed science by every single major scientific institution on the planet, we can't take him seriously. And let's look at the facts. Let's look at the economics. There are now 650,000 green jobs in the United Kingdom, Ian. To actually say that we're deindustrializing because we're going green is absolute nonsense. There are 30,000 jobs left in the legacy oil industry. So I actually think what we're looking at is a new green economy that will be good for Britain and good for the environment. Let's look at the costs of wind energy. The latest stats from the Department of Environment outline the costs of each form of energy. It was £44 per megawatt for offshore wind, £41 for onshore wind, £38 for solar, and £114 for gas. And his point is right. We have the most expensive electricity in Europe at the moment. Why? Because our electricity price is pegged to the most expensive electricity feeding into the grid at any one time. So that means if we've even just got 10% gas, the price is fixed by gas, and gas is £114 versus £38 for solar, and that's why we've got a problem with the costs of this. It's the fossil fuel is hammering us, not the green energy.
One of Chris's points, Donica, as you would have heard, is that to fully implement and construct this game-changing, a new economy, as it were, a new industrial revolution, to do all of that is hundreds of millions of pounds worth of money required. In that time, the free wind energy ain't going to be manifesting anytime soon because we've got to pay for it. That could take decades and decades and decades when we're already sitting on enough fuel via oil to make sure we can all turn the lights on and drive our cars, etc. And the world isn't dying as a result. So to him, it's just yes, you would end up with this kind of green utopia, but there's no reason to want to get there, is Chris's point.
Well, there's many reasons. First of all, the large majority of the British public don't agree with Chris. They actually think the government should be taking more action tackling the climate crisis that's unfolding before our eyes. British consumers are already paying for the costs in rising food prices because of extreme weather across the planet. But British consumers are already paying the costs of extreme weather as they pay higher insurance costs for their homes due to increased flooding. There's been a 7 to 10% increase in extreme flooding in the United Kingdom. We're paying the price. And what he's calling for is what I would call socialist corporatism. He wants the state to pay the costs for the profits of the oil industry. And actually, the idea of keeping us addicted to the oil economy is nuts. You're not as old as me, Ian, but I have lived through 3 to 4 oil economic shocks to this country. It has hammered our economy when there's a sudden spike in oil prices. And it cost us £70 billion 2 years ago with the Ukraine oil shock. What Ed Miliband is absolutely right. We need to protect British security and British energy as fast as possible by weaning us off the international oil and gas market. Drilling more for oil and gas doesn't wean us off the oil market. It keeps us addicted, and that's bad for Britain, and it's bad for our future.
Here's a question, Donica, that came in for you from Rob, Rob's on a boat in Thameside. He says, can you ask your environmental evangelist the simple question, what is more important, the UK economy or net zero?
It's a false dichotomy, because actually going for a clean energy economy wins for the economy and wins for climate. So it's actually a win-win. Look, the facts are, over the last 20 years, Ian, we have cut our carbon emissions by 50%, and our GDP has gone up by over 90%. We are greening and we're getting richer. It's possible to do both. Look at me at the moment. Actually, I'm just looking around. At lunchtime today, my solar panels were charging up my solar battery for my e-bike. They were heating my house and they're powering my laptop. Over the year, my solar panels give me a profit for my gas and electricity consumption of £300 a year. I want that for every household in Britain as soon as possible.
But am I right in saying, though, Donica, you tried a windmill and it couldn't even power your hairdryer? Is that what happened? That's the word on the street.
Sure. As an environmentalist and somebody who agrees on who actually is horrified by the science that's unfolding before our eyes, I believe in practicing what I preach and trial things out. So in my house, I have an old 1840s cottage in the heart of London. I've tried solid wall insulation, which has worked really well. I've tried thermal hot water, which is good, but I wouldn't do it again. I've tried solar, and I've tried an experimental wind turbine. What it does, it produces enough electricity to power my laptop and my lights. That's not very good. And so what the facts with wind turbines is, if you double the length of the blade, you double the power coming out of it. So a small wind turbine for a house is not going to do hardly any good. You have to have a reasonably sized turbine. And the turbines today are extraordinary. When I started on this path in the 90s, Ian, when I became aware of the series of the science, you know what the wind turbine industry in the United Kingdom consisted of? 2 guys with 2 sheds in their backyard. They were selling small turbines for off-grid cottages. It has gone from that, a couple £100 per turbine, to amazing multi-billion-pound industry that is weaning Britain off our oil addiction. That's good for everybody.
Donica, thank you. Donica McCarthy. He is the director at the Climate Media Coalition. You heard 2 voices there. Which one do you concur with? Both arguing quite emphatically. Chris there from the environment editor at the Daily Skeptic saying this is it's just an industry that's not even needed. So we're going to rip everything up, start again at the cost of hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds in order to create something that is surplus to requirements. We already have loads of stuff to power our houses, drive our cars. Don't need this malarkey. Donica couldn't disagree more passionately. You heard him there. Your response on this, 0344 499 1000.
All this is brand new to us, because if I'd never heard of it before, I would be fizzing.
You would be.
Fizzing. Steam would be coming out of all my orifices.
Absolutely.
And I sympathise with his rage, because I've felt that rage. Now, I admit, because we've read about it, we've known since Andrew Norfolk, since Sue Reed, since other people, since Anne Cryer, that this has been going on, we've almost become blunted to the sheer horror of it.
Yes.
But now, the rest of the world sees. And as I say, I don't just want an inquiry, I want a formal apology.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Comments coming in from you. Dave says, no, the majority of people are not more interested in net zero. They were the words of Donica McCarthy, of course. Chris, if the wind energy is so good, then remove the subsidies and let the public choose. By the way, I agree with Chris. That's from David. And Stork says, I'm surrounded by wind and solar farms in Essex and my electricity bill has never been so high. Who's benefiting from these ideas? Because it ain't me. And there lies the central problem. Mick is in Chichester on that issue of wind farms. How you doing, Mick?
Yeah, not so bad. Hi, how's it going?
Good as gold at this end. What are your thoughts on this?
I'm quite passionate about this subject, and I've done a hell of a lot of research.
Go on.
And it's basically we're being fed a whole web of lies. It's not just one lie, it's just loads of different lies. I could go on about this for hours, and you haven't got hours, so I'll try and cut it down. I saw a TED Talk a few years ago with the former founder of Greenpeace. And he basically said that...
He's kind of converted from what he was, hasn't he, this guy?
Yes. He said that the two types of renewable energy that we could use that is truly renewable and truly controllable would be hydro and nuclear. But Greenpeace are against both. Because obviously hydro involves flooding areas that, you know, where animals have lived and stuff that. And everybody's petrified of nuclear. But he stated that when it's not sunny, you don't get any energy. When it's not windy, you don't get any energy. And a prime example is in my garden, and I've got a sun trap for a garden. We've got solar lights. In the summer, they light up as soon as it gets dusk, and they stay on all night. In the winter,
nothing.
They barely glow when it gets dark, and it's so there is no energy stored up in it, and it's just the thing is your previous caller said about the most of the big scientific institutes. It's like the 98% is a massive lie, because it's not 98% of scientists who deal with climate change. It's 98% of the scientists they asked, and that's a massive difference. And it's sort of like misleads people into thinking that it is actually right. There's just as many people who say that it's not a catastrophe, that we've got hundreds of years to sort it out. And there's evidence at the moment that shows that all of the processes that they're trying to put in now, that by 2100, you'll only get an extra 5 years before they would have happened normally. So doing nothing...
Yes, it is actually far more efficient than doing all of this.
Yes. I mean, the fact that it costs so much money and use so many resources to make one wind turbine, and it only lasts about 15 years, and then you can't recycle it. You have to bin it, and you have to start a new one. And when you see the pictures of, like, the mines they use to take up the cobalt and the lithium and stuff like that, and then you see a Canadian oil rig, and the Canadian oil rig is surrounded by complete beauty, and then you've got this ugly open scar where they've got child labour digging up this stuff, and you know they're dying so that we can have battery cars.
And there are so many areas of this argument that you hit the nail on the head, to be honest, Mick, that are going to happen anyway. You know, I mean, the example I always give is Sadiq Khan's ULEZ fascination, where he's somehow got away with spending hundreds of millions of pounds on a technology that is going to catch about 8% of drivers who won't exist anyway in 5 years' time, because naturally those cars will be replaced. There's no other area of life you'd be allowed to spend that sort of public money on something that won't exist just by dint of time. Same point. But for some reason, the evangelists in this respect, Mick, don't seem to want to get on board with that point. Wouldn't anybody get on board with that point, you'd think?
Well, as a slightly different thing, I was always told as a kid that the Sahara Desert grows 1 foot every year. And since the year 2000, the Sahara Desert has stopped growing and has started shrinking. And the reason it started shrinking is because to get CO2, plants use their pores in their sort of like their structure. And if there's not much CO2, they open their pores wider. So when they open their pores wider, they give off more of their fluid. So therefore, they need lots of water to survive. When you've got lots of CO2, the pores can get the same CO2 from a smaller aperture, so therefore they don't give off as much of their fluid, so they can survive in a more arid climate.
Yeah.
So the CO2 is still needed.
Got it. Listen, I hear you, Mick. It's a great call. Thank you very much indeed for that. Don't go away, Francis. We'll be with you as soon as possible. Let's get a voice note on a different issue that we're discussing as well, relevant to the news agenda of the day, Starmer and grooming gangs. This comes from Ian.
I'm just listening to the excerpt of Starmer talking about the grooming gangs and how if politicians are not telling the truth. He's a fine one to talk, isn't he? Look at his election promises. He hasn't told the truth in any of them. So kettle pot black brings the thoughts to mind.
Well, lots of pots, lots of kettles. Bang on as well, Ian. Yeah, there's quite a lot. If that's his central argument about integrity and honesty, then frankly, Starmer's lost it before he opens his mouth. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Lots to get through in the next section. We'll continue on this. Is the green argument right after all? If your house is panelled up, solar panelled up, I want to hear all about it. How's that working out? And have you got a windmill on your roof? That'd be extraordinary. You don't meet many people with one of those, unless that's you. Details coming up on the other side of the news at 2, which is next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Yes, good afternoon. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome to the home of common sense. Lots to get through here. We've been talking about wind power because it's replaced everything else in terms of domination in the energy department. Apparently, wind provided more electricity last year than ever, moving further away from fossil fuels to power the nation. This is according to new data. Does that mean, then, that the Greenies have won the argument on this particular issue? Your response on that. Also this afternoon, Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick has linked the grooming gang scandal to mass migration, citing medieval attitudes to women among some immigrants. People have been saying that for years and shouted down, which is where one of the big problems began. We'll have more on that as well. And obese patients and smokers face being sent to the back of the queue for NHS surgery under government plans to get patients fitter before treatment. I think that probably is not desirable if you're fat or a smoker, but arguably the best course of action in terms of prioritising treatment. Details on the way. Lots to come. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. If you want to send us a voice note, 87222. You can bypass the queues or you can give us a phone, 0344 499 1000. Lots of comment as well from you. I'm a former Labour Party member, says Neil in Dundee, and a trade unionist, now joined Reform. I left Labour when I realised they didn't stand for working class people anymore. The rape gang scandal further underlines this. I think there's a lot of people feeling that way. Jeff says, enjoying the programme. I'd be interested in the cost of replacement of worn-out wind turbines, solar panel replacement, batteries in EVs, as none of this is equipped to last. Who will pay for it? Free or cheap prices? What a laugh, says Jeff. Yeah, I hear you. Adi in Adlington. Wind produced 29% of electricity, which accounts for 20% of our total energy needs. This, therefore, equates to 5.8% in reality. I'm not good at maths or numbers, but I'm going to take Adi's word for it. Thank you for that. Matt says, I feel the same as your recent texter. I'm a 50-year-old married guy, British, never been in trouble, hard worker, well paid, but I'm thinking of moving away from the UK. This is breaking my heart, and I'm in the verge of a breakdown, seeing my beautiful country being taken over by unwelcomed illegals and the useless government choosing to do nothing. I'm on the verge of tears. Man alive. People are feeling that way. I mean, who'd have thought that that would become something people were talking about? I mean, you always get a celebrity go, if that government gets in, I'm going to leg it to the Seychelles and become an immigrant. But now people, ordinary working Brits, are having that feeling in the upside-down world we are now existing in. Let's get a word on all the big issues of the day. Theo Usherwood, political commentator and all-round god, is back with us. How are you, Theo?
Great to see you and Happy New Year, if we can still say that on the,
I think you're
7th of January.
Is there a cut-off point for that? Because we all feel we have to caveat it, don't we? Happy New Year. Can we still say that? I think the cut-off point should be February the 19th for no particular reason.
You're going to be my last Happy New Year.
Is that right?
It's going to be an auspicious. This is going to be an auspicious position where I was going to say this is the last time I wish somebody Happy New Year. After this, it's just Happy January, the kind of coldest, darkest month of the year.
Indeed. I feel privileged. Let's have a look at some of the big stories. Record year for wind power. We were asking the question as to whether this means the Green argument was right after all on this particular point. Mr Miliband, of course, will say, this is clear evidence that this is the way forward. Those that are a little sceptical about this say, well, it doesn't really reveal the true picture of what's happening. It's massively expensive. If we're wheeling out this infrastructure, we're not going to see cheaper prices anytime soon, just because of by dint of the sheer cost of getting this stuff in place. So it's not really the win it on first look appears.
Let's just go back to the Labour promise before the general election, Ian. And the Labour promise was that by investing in green technology, green renewable technology, energy prices would come down by £300 over the course of this Parliament. Labour ministers now can't repeat that claim in the House of Commons because they would know they would have to go back to the dispatch box to correct that claim if they made it on the floor of the House of Commons. We saw the energy price cap go up 10% in October. It's just gone up this month. It's going to go up again in April, according to those who study these things closely, like Cornwall Insights. Energy prices are not coming down, and they are not going to come down anytime soon. At net zero, you can understand the logic of net zero, but for many of your listeners, most of your listeners, who cannot afford to invest in green technology to power their homes, and that is the vast, vast majority of people, it is going to mean higher energy prices. And this government says it's on the side, and it said before the election, it said consistently it's on the side of working people, ordinary people who are struggling to get by. But net zero puts up, this project is not going to see your energy bills come down, and quite the opposite is happening, in fact. And if you're spending more money on your energy bills, then you've got less money to spend on the other things that you might like to.
What's interesting, I just wonder how this is going to pan out. Donald Trump's arrival in the White House in a couple of weeks' time, Theo, will potentially be a game changer in this wider debate, won't it, globally speaking? And he's made a lot of noise about, he doesn't buy into this stuff. Drill, baby, drill. He wants the oil. He's not worried about, he keeps talking about wind turbines and how many birds they kill. I think when he had his meeting with Starmer, and who else was at that?
It was a phone. I think it was a phone call, wasn't it?
A phone call,
and Starmer was trying to keep him on track, and he was just like,
what about the
turbines? We've got, the birds flying into the word turbines, and that kind of. Look, the more important point, Ian, is that the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. This is the really important point: is that they're diametrically opposed on this. We already saw, Donald Trump intervene on his Truth Social media platform to vehemently criticise the energy price, the windfall tax policy. It's gone up. I think the headline rate of tax now for oil and gas firms in the UK is now 78%, because the windfall tax was put up by Rachel Reeves in her budget of October the 30th. Donald Trump took to Truth Social to say, criticise that decision to back wind turbines. We're not, Keir Starmer remains committed to not issuing any other oil and gas exploration licenses in the North Sea. And that Texas-based firm that decided to pull out the North Sea by 2029, of course, these things take a period of time, given the commitment that a company makes if they're deciding to drill in places like the North Sea. Keir Starmer, Donald Trump is diametrically opposed, and he was highly critical at the very start of the year about that decision to put up windfall taxes and to see an American company, pull out of the UK. And that's not just in terms of the energy that we can get from oil and gas in the North Sea, our own interdependencies. So, of course, if Russia, what we saw with Ukraine, the energy price spike with Ukraine, but this is also a sector in Scotland which employs thousands of people right across from Aberdeen and onwards, because this is a hugely important industry, and we should be, the point Donald Trump's making is that the UK should be supporting businesses to build platforms to explore for oil and gas in the North Sea, because that will create energy security ultimately.
Well, that is the theory behind it all. But you can see this almighty clash coming in our direction, and it will, if nothing else, it's going to be used to clearly try and prove the point that this net zero thing, it can either be global or not at all. You can't, if that's what you believe in, then the weather, the climate change, if that's the way we are supposed to look at it, doesn't hypothecate to one particular geographical area.
The UK makes up something, I think it's less than 1% of all global carbon emissions. We're not going to save the planet by just the UK going it alone on net zero. If you compare our emissions to India, to China, to Brazil, to America, we might feel good about ourselves if we go down this route, Ian. We might think we're doing our bit to save the planet, but we're not ultimately going to save the planet. And also, if you look at the way things are heading in terms of energy prices and energy bills, I'd have thought that a government that said it was committed to supporting working people and supporting and ensuring that we all had more money in our back pocket would be attempting to ensure that we have a plentiful supply of energy, even if that means that in some instances it comes from fossil fuels.
Indeed. There is another interesting little fact on this. I understand that Elon Musk, in addition to all of his many business endeavours and his multi-squillion-pound car empire and space rockets, also is producing solar panels for domestic use. Now, if that is the case, one might assume that, you know, the benevolence and the, you know, sheer heady levels of only being interested in the good would continue, and Mr. Musk will be attempting to ensure that American energy policy doesn't quite look what in the way that Trump might have envisaged it, and, you know, he flogs everybody solar panels for $1 a time or something.
Well, what was really interesting about this is at the middle of October last year, I did an interview with the boss at LinkedIn, and they obviously study lots of metrics about what companies are looking for, what is needed in the economy. And she made the point to me that ultimately in the green economy, we just do not have enough people to fit the solar panels, to insulate the homes, to fit the heat, the heat pump, boilers. That there just wasn't, we hadn't put in the investment to ensure that we have the workers with the vocational skills to move to a green economy. Wow. And that if Keir Starmer and Ed Miliband want to be successful in doing that, and it's all very well talking a good game in terms of moving to net zero, but we need to make sure we've got the people on the ground who can fit the solar panels or the heat pump boilers and make sure that and insulate the homes. These solar panels, they're incredible. I've seen them. One of my friends has got them on his house, and he actually puts money back into the grid. But they're incredibly expensive. I mean, he's a multi-millionaire. Yeah. And I could go to his house and you see his solar panels, and it's right across the roof of his house. And then you go into his shed, and he has all of these batteries. So on the days that the sun doesn't shine, all of the energy that's being collected on the days that the sun was shining is then used to power his home. And there's a surplus there to put the money back into.
But that's tens and tens of thousands of pounds. Yes.
But it's tens and tens of thousands
on every
of pounds.
Single house.
Yeah, and people don't have the money to spend or to make that outlay. And there was a scheme where actually there was people, were looking at doing it, but then you attach the debt to the house. So when you actually come to sell your house in a few years' time, because you've attached the debt to the house, because you then have solar panels, you need to persuade somebody not just to buy the price of pay for the price of the house, but to accept the fact that they're going to have higher energy bills, and they're going to have solar panels.
And they might not like panels, So you've got all of those issues. Let's move to Robert Jenrick. Immigrants are coming to Britain with medieval attitudes to women. Yvette Cooper, of course, is promising to tackle child abuse cover-ups, implementing some of those Baroness J recommendations, none of which, as I understand it, I think there were 20 recommendations. I don't think they've seen the light of day yet. The Tories said they were on it, but just didn't get chance to find parliamentary time for it. But she says she will. Jenrick saying, look, there's an elephant in the room here. I guess the only question mark I have over this is that Mr. Jenrick was literally the immigration minister, and I don't remember him saying this at the time.
You're quite right. What's really interesting is the dynamics this story speaks to between the Conservative Party and Reform UK. As you rightly say, Robert Jenrick was the immigration minister. And what happens with Conservatives facing Nigel Farage is that in order to convince voters that Conservatives can still appeal to Reform voters, because they were in power for 14 years and didn't act on this particular issue, they're now Johnny-come-latelys, and so they have to overcompensate. So Robert Jenrick uses this kind of language in order to attract attention away from Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage could afford to be, because he was quick onto this issue, Elon Musk has been raising this particular issue, and the link between, we now associate, for the fallout over Tommy Robinson, but we associate Elon Musk and Nigel Farage as partners, if at sometimes it's an uneasy partnership. So Robert Jenrick has to make up for that and overcompensate for that, and that's why he uses the language that he does. What's then really interesting is you have the centre-right Tories, the more moderate Tories, who are now becoming really upset about the language being used by Robert Jenrick. You saw Samuel Kusama, who was a advisor to Number 10, describing Robert Jenrick as the most divisive politician in the UK. And that then becomes a test of Kemi Badenoch's leadership. Which way is she going to take the party? And then given that we've seen all of the defections, the donors like Nick Candy saying now he's going to back reform, Kemi Badenoch has no choice but to row in behind Robert Jenrick and support Robert Jenrick. The Conservative Party, under Kemi Badenoch's leadership, has made its decision about which direction it is going to go, and there are many Conservatives, centre-right Conservatives, who are now politically homeless because they don't feel that the Conservative Party represents them. And that's only a good thing for the Liberal Democrats, potentially, because, of course, they won 72 seats at the general election. The Conservatives, by moving more to the right, are actually occupying a space that predominantly now is the domain of Reform UK. And I can't see them being successful in convincing voters, despite whatever language Robert Jenrick or others use, of actually convincing voters that they're the real deal over Reform UK. I think Nigel Farage has got this one sewn up. I think voters, your listeners, they're not stupid, Ian. They know when people are jumping on bandwagons or coming, suddenly pretending, saying that they're interested in something when they didn't actually do anything.
Well, indeed, and you've got to feel sorry for Jess Phillips on this one, and I do find it odd, given her CV of campaigning in this area of protection of women and young girls. But nonetheless, as a minister, she is merely saying exactly the same thing as previous Conservative ministers. It's almost exactly the same line.
And the people, I feel sorry for the victims. And they haven't had, none of the 20, I think it was 22 recommendations from the Alexis J report. We're only now talking about that when, as a result of the story coming, hitting the headlines as a result of Elon Musk and Reform's intervention. None of those, and Alexis, it has been admitted as such by those who are behind that report. None of, this was not a priority until those in Reform and those around Reform and Elon Musk made it a priority, and the action hadn't been taken. And you never condone, and I understand the argument that's made by the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, about the way that Jess Phillips had been smeared in his campaign. But your starting point, and this is why I think he came across as being tone deaf, your starting point has to by The priority is the victims and ensuring the victims get justice. So that this never happens again. And by putting Jess Phillips at the forefront of your thoughts, I understand that she is, there are people who are, now subject to criminal proceedings, and she has received the most vile abuse. But you have to start with the victims of this appalling, horrendous abuse over many, many years, where social services and the police did nothing.
We've got 30 seconds on this one. Nigel Farage will sacrifice Elon Musk donation to keep Tommy Robinson away. Look, there's a couple of points on this. What's interesting about this particular story is that I don't think Robinson has ever asked to join Reform. So I don't, the scenario is sort of largely just sort of notional discussion about it, but nonetheless, it's about association. A lot of Musk's fan base, a lot of Reform supporters quite like Robinson, but Mr. Farage and Richard Tice as well. In fact, this morning, Farage gave an interview with a former colleague of ours and doubled down on his, don't want anything to do with Robinson. This man, he sort of referred to him as, this character or this man or something, quite dismissive of him in that respect. But he also, and this is a point for comment, if you can, Theo, he kind of suggested he still wants to mend bridges with Elon Musk. That relationship ain't over. Do you see that rekindling anytime soon?
I'm not sure it may not happen anytime soon, but I think, Nigel Farage remains tight with the whole of the Trump administration, the whole of the Trump team. Reform UK, the way it is structured, Nigel Farage is not going to be replaced any time soon. So he's going to be the leader of Reform for some time to come. The other thing to say is that, if Nigel Farage is ultimately going to be successful, he's got to break through the 30% barrier in terms of the polls, and the vast majority of the British public have no truck with Tommy Robinson. Nigel Farage, if he wants to make that progress in 2025, cannot afford to be associated with Tommy Robinson. There may be a handful of reform supporters in the core that actually think that Tommy Robinson has a point. But ultimately, if Nigel Farage is going to, he's going to have to build a broad base of support, given our electoral system, if he is going to be successful. And to do that, he needs to appeal to voters who look at Keir Starmer and think, hang on a moment, this isn't what I voted for, who look at the Tories and say, well, they're not much better than they had 14 years anyway, and we're looking for a genuine alternative. And Nigel Farage, if he wants to be successful, has to be that genuine alternative. And there's no way that he can be that genuine alternative if he's hand in glove with Tommy Robinson.
There it is. Theo, thank you. Theo Usherwood, political commentator with us here on Talk. Over to you. Anything you heard there you want to chip in on, particularly that last story as well? 0344 499 1000.
All this is brand new to us, because if I'd never heard of it before, I would be fizzing.
You would be.
Fizzing. Steam would be coming out of all my orifices.
Absolutely.
And I sympathise with his rage, because I've felt that rage. Now, I admit, because we've read about it, we've known since Andrew Norfolk, since Sue Reed, since other people, since Anne Cryer, that this has been going on, we've almost become blunted to the sheer horror of it.
Yes.
But now, the rest of the world sees. And as I say, I don't just want an inquiry. I want a formal apology.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
One here from Patricia, who says, I have a solution to how houses can be built without using new land. If all the illegal immigrants are deported, the British people in bad housing could be put in the hotels. Then the government can knock down these bad houses and build new 3-storey secure spatial apartments. Afterwards, those people can be rehoused in the same area. There you go. Yeah, but you're making the error there, Patricia, of thinking logically about something. What's interesting about immigration is that even if Reform UK were in power tomorrow, they would arguably do something, or certainly try to do something, that hasn't been done before with the Channel crossings. But those people who are already here, and depending on how or which figures you care to look at, legal or illegal, will probably remain here. And that's not going to really... I can't see that changing under any party. And Trump's going to stumble across the same problem in the US. You know, Trump was very big on, we'll get rid of all these people, blah, blah, blah. Didn't really do it when he was president last time. Certainly no greater than Obama did it in the presidency before him. And then sort of Trump changed his tone a little bit by talking about, well, if we find people who've got criminal records, we'll kick them out. And that's a very different mood music from we're going to go round with the Hoover and get everybody that shouldn't be here out. I just don't see that happening, if for no other reason than the sheer might of the legal system that will rain down on any of these cases, as it does anywhere else on planet Earth, it seems. Let's go to Francis in Wiltshire. Back to green energy. Francis, how's your windmill going, by the way? Good afternoon.
Well, I've got very great environmental concerns, actually, about windmills and solar. They don't last very long in relative terms. They last about 15, 20 years, as one of the other callers astutely said.
Yeah.
Then they have to all be replaced. There's no costings for that. I'm still trying to pursue whole-of-life costings for windmills and solar.
Which could be huge.
We're just being told... porkies, really. I've just pulled up. I mean, there's a very good website called the Energy Dashboard, which is free for everybody to use.
How are we doing today on the Energy Dashboard?
Well, today, right now, so we're at I'm looking at 1425 figures, so it repeats quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Wind is slightly ahead, 34.9. Gas is 29.1. Solar is remarkably 6.3, but of course that shuts off in 2 hours when it goes dark.
Yes.
So we can assume that will switch to gas, so gas will then take over. 11.9% from imports.
Yes.
Well,
there's always an import figure there as well.
Yeah. Now. Those are very dangerous now because the Chinese are going round and the Russians are probably having a go too at chopping cables. So we've got an energy security risk there. So if those cables were taken out, we're in a lot of difficulty.
So
if we're importing all our oil.
Okay, so the import, if you add the, I'm not trying to create an argument for the sake of it here, Francis, but if you add up the imports and the gas we're using, then fossil fuels is still above wind, right?
Oh, absolutely, well above.
Yeah.
In total, because I don't want to talk about biomass, which is 5.0, because that's so environmentally unfriendly.
Sure.
Burning up trees for no good reason.
Yeah, and nobody wants to see that. Look, we'd all support... I don't know anybody who doesn't support a cleaner environment, but there's got to be a sensible and a sustainable way of getting there.
Well, I wanted to get on to that because we're not talking enough about the environment. I mean, firstly, I can take a sort of a higher level view that CO2 is not the issue. And I point everybody happily in the direction, if you want a primer, go and look at the Climate, the movie, on YouTube.
Yeah. I'm aware of it, and lots of Obama's former advisors on this and Nobel Peace Prize winning scientists making the very point that I think you're making.
The aforementioned Patrick Moore, founder of Greenpeace. I think Patrick is probably turning circles at the moment because the windmills off the northeast coast of the US are chopping up whales. We had a golden eagle in Scotland cut in half by a wind turbine. The amount of marine and fishing damage that's being done by wind turbines just cannot be underestimated. I've got 7 FOIs into Department of Energy and Net Zero. Oddly, they don't want to answer me. They haven't answered me since September. So they're in breach of quite a lot.
That's interesting. You've just reminded me as well, we had Joanna Lumley on the programme a couple of years ago, who was, obviously she talks a lot about wildlife and things like that, and she was talking about the construction of wind farms in the sea and the sheer level of damage in order to just put one of those things in place, which is something that doesn't really get... I don't hear Chris Packham talking about that very often.
No, you don't. I'm afraid the environmentalists, the greenies, somehow go very quiet on topics like this.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, so it's people like me that are now standing up for the environment and saying, you know, asking very hard questions. Because we can't, you know, apart from the whole of life cost, which I was just referring to,
sure.
Which we've not got to, because basically windmills and solar are very toxic. They've got to be buried very, very carefully. So that's landfill, which, of course, the lovely EU didn't want us to do much in the way of landfill. Well, that's a huge thing. I'm waiting, actually, to get some figures from Anglesey.
Sure.
Because you might have heard there's just a normal storm took out some windmills and solar panels on Anglesey. So I'd like to know what the replacement costs are there, what the landfill costs are there.
Well, listen, it sounds like you're doing some pretty diligent work there, Francis. Thank you for a great call, because you come at it from a, you know, slightly more unconventional angle, but an absolute thorough one, and clearly an informed one too. Thank you. Francis in Wiltshire. Neil says, wind power has produced more electricity than other sources because a lot of the efficient power stations are closing or importing wood pellets from thousands of miles away. You know, I said at the beginning, I think there's more to this story, and we're getting great comment this afternoon, just there from Francis and one from Neil, proving that very point. Lines are still open. It's 25 to 3. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Talk 0344 499 1000. Just a moment as well to cover something else here that is absolutely crucial to the wider debate of healthcare in this country, which of course we've talked about incessantly over the last few years. Obese patients and smokers could be sent to the back of the queue for NHS surgery. The government is said to be looking at plans where patients are given a surgery date once deemed fit to proceed. Those waiting for hip and knee surgery would be first to be given a weight loss programme, and smokers would be urged to quit. Let's speak to Jane Deville-Armand, Chair of the British Obesity Society. Jane, good afternoon to you. Not entirely new, this idea that, you know, a surgeon often says, look, I want to operate, but I can't because, you know, until you've lost some weight. What's different about this latest announcement?
I don't think there's anything different, really. I mean, this kind of treatment plan has been going on for some years now. And to be honest, if you're a surgeon or working there, you know, as you're a healthcare professional and you're dealing with a patient, you have to work out risk and balance. And clearly, if someone is carrying a lot of excessive weight, then there's a much higher percentage of them becoming ill during the operation or post-operation. So obviously the surgeons have to make some kind of decision as to when it's convenient to do these operations. And the other factor is, of course, if you've got a knee that's not working correctly and you're carrying excessive amounts of weight, clearly, even if you have the operation, the chances are that the fact... Exactly. It's going to make no difference. So they have to work out and calculate whether the operation will actually impact on the person's health in the long run. And you know, it's obvious that if someone is carrying excessive amounts of weight and they've got a knee injury, that it will heal much quicker and be much better if they lose a bit of weight. So, I mean, it's common sense, really.
Of course it is. On the wider question about obesity, Jane, and I've asked this question forever. I don't know how we got here, really, as a society, in terms of we're living in a world where we've never had more information about keeping fit. There's gyms where there never used to be gyms. I mean, when I was a kid, I don't think a private gym even existed that you could be a member of. The sports centre, maybe. Daytime TV, online, social media, celebrities releasing DVDs, and Jamie Oliver telling you how to eat better, TV shows, Martin Lewis, you know, telling you how to budget were better for... The information is absolutely everywhere. It's a plethora. And yet, simultaneously, we're all chucking on the pounds. What's gone wrong?
Yeah, we've got too many fast food outlets now. We have too much easily consumable foods everywhere we go. You know, you only have to go into town. There's so many outlets selling cheap, ultra-processed foods. We no longer cook. People no longer have time to cook. You know, in the last 50 years, we've seen a massive move from, you know, I mean, when I was at school and younger, you know, I used to come home, even though my mum worked, there'd be dinner on the table, probably meat and 2 veg, you know, it's just standard. There was no massive choice. You know, you probably had 2 lots of biscuits, different biscuits out there. Now, you know, you've got whole rows and rows and rows of fizzy drinks, you know, rubbish food, ultra-processed foods, ready-made, so people just fetch it out, shove it in the microwave.
Is it? I mean, that sounds very obvious, and it is as obvious as that, right? I mean, it is as simple as the fact that you can't, you know, you've got an app on your phone. I could get a bucket of KFC delivered into this studio in about 20 minutes.
Exactly. I mean, you know, everybody I know, all my older friends and my children and their friends, you know, they come home, they don't know what to cook, they phone up, they get it delivered. They've no idea what's in there. They've no idea how many calories are in there. Most of it's not very nutritious. And interestingly, physical activity actually it's brilliant, obviously, for your health and well-being, but it doesn't have a massive impact on your weight loss. The only way you can lose weight is by changing your eating behaviours.
So you're saying physical exercise doesn't have the big impact, it's the food?
Yes, I mean, it obviously helps. And once you've lost your weight, or once you've got to a weight that you're happy with, then doing physical activity will obviously maintain your weight. But to lose weight by doing physical activity, I mean, literally, you'd have to do 6 hours a day. Do you know what I mean? It's not
in order to lose.
Go and do
January is a good time, right? I mean, you know, I know it's a bit of a cliche. People have dry January and they have all sorts of heady ideas. I mean, you look at me, Jane, and you probably think he's a bit easy on the eye, this fella. He's clearly in fine form. And absolutely. But I've been going to the gym. I mean, I go to the gym anyway, but I mean, I've been going a little more because I thought, you know, keep fit. It's a new year. It's a new mindset. Does that last Those of us that think, you know, we've got a, a new chapter in our life. Let's give it a go.
I think the thing is, Ian, that people have unrealistic goals. So they start in January, they go, right, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. I'm going to run every morning before breakfast. I'm going to change my eating behaviours. It's too many things. You know, just incorporate stuff that you actually like doing and that you will carry on doing forever. So, you know, rather than going down the shop to buy a paper in the car, just walk down there. You know, things that you can do easily and that's not going to be like a massive chunk out of your life.
Yeah, so it's doing little bits that gradually, you know, rather than sort of almost punishing yourself into some
exactly. I mean, the one thing I would say is like the consumption of fizzy drinks is ridiculous. I've no idea where that started from. You know, like back in the day, you'd have like a Vimto man come round on a Friday. There are other things as well, but you know, the Vimto man or the lemonade man, and he'd leave you a bottle of Vimto, and we'd be all excited. Now everybody drinks it and consumes it just for when they're thirsty. I see so many people just guzzling back like fizzy drinks. Why do they need fizzy drinks? Even the low-calorie ones are not good for you. Stop drinking them, everybody.
It's a very good point, and you know what? You should come and see our production office before we do a show. There's myself and Adam and Finn. We're all sitting there, and invariably we've each got a can of the full-fat Coca-Cola. And that's like a daily thing.
It is, and it's really, really awful because one, it's obviously high in calories. I mean, I used to work with truck drivers on the motorways, you know, working with obese truck drivers. A lot of them have got type 2 diabetes, and they weren't overeating, but they were over drinking. So they'd often have 4 like energy drinks a day, which total their full amount of calorie allowance
in 4 cans. Yes,
in 4 cans, and you know, and that's the issue. You know, it's not just food and what people are eating. It definitely is in what they're drinking and what they're consuming outside of their like daily diets.
Sure. Jane, I mean, you're the chair of the British Obesity Society. I'm bound to observe you don't look like somebody who is obese. Were you previously in that place, or is this just an area that you feel strongly about?
Well, it's interesting. My dad had 9 brothers and sisters. My dad had his first heart attack at 42. Lots of my relatives are overweight and obese. It's a struggle. I find it really hard. I am probably like half a stone overweight. And it's a struggle. And I love food. I love donuts. I love McDonald's. I love all the rubbish food that's out there. You know, and it's hard. But at the end of the day, if you had a car, you know you can change it every 10 years.
Sure.
If you have a body, you can't. You've got one body, you've got it for life.
Yeah.
If you mess up with it and give it rubbish food, the same as if you put bad oil in your car or old engine oil back in your car, it's going to not work very well, and that's the same with your body.
Yeah, it's funny. We spend more servicing our cars than we do our bodies.
Exactly. It is. I mean, people MOT the car for 300 quid and then won't go and have an MOT themselves.
I had this very conversation at the weekend with a mate, and because I went for a health check, I had the bloods done and all that business, and I had to pay for it. And he said, "Oh, really? So you went private?" I said, "Well, I actually paid 150 quid less than I paid on the service of the car 2 weeks before. So I'm not about to apologise for having that done." Listen, Jane, it's been great talking. Jane Devil-Armand, chair of the British Obesity Society. I mean, she's bang on. Here's the thing. This is one of those weird questions, isn't it? Unusual for most debates where we already know the answer. We're not searching for the answer because we know what the answer is. And as we said that, you know, it only occurred to me when talking to Jane that people get Deliveroos and Just Eats to the building, don't they, Adam? Some people order out. I reckon the Colonel's Chicken Parlour would probably deliver because there's one round the corner. I think we should put that to the test. Amy, can you book a couple of buckets in, please? We'll find out by 4. But she's right, and fizzy drinks are massive. They were, as kids, she mentioned the Vimto man. I think that sort of predates my era. But I do remember, and I don't know whether this was just a regional thing in Kent or elsewhere, but one day we were playing football on the green, as you do. You know, typical housing estate, there's a green. We're playing football. And suddenly, coming up the road, this big, massive truck comes with a fella kind of standing on the back. And it's full of crates of, like, Coca-Cola or cola, cherryade, orangeade, lemonade. And this came up the road. I thought Jesus had arrived in our street. I mean, it was like, such a thing exists? I've never seen so many bottles of flipping Coca-Cola and all that goes with it. And the brand was called Mr. Bacon. And I don't know what happened to Mr. Bacon. I've got a funny feeling why this nugget of information has just come to me, I don't know, that it was based in Sittingbourne in Kent. Mr. Bacon, and so it was their own cola and orangeade, and they were flogging it door to door, basically. And everyone ended up, you know, but there were some houses got a lot of it. I think we got one bottle or some. I mean, it was just the most exciting thing to see this fella. Little did I know that Mr. Bacon, the clue was in the name, really, wasn't it? He was, you know, maybe that was the beginning. Those kind of services were the beginning of our journey into our reliance on bad stuff, like too much, because that stuff tastes nice. A can of Coke is just the most beautiful, refreshing drink. I mean, the Diet Coke and the Coke Zero, you meet those people every now and again. They are odd, aren't they? A bit strange, those characters. Your full-fat Coke is where it's at. But too much of it, I mean, we all know the answer. 0344 499 1000. The Voice of Doom is back. Day 7. It's a rollover. We're doing that next.
Kemi Badenoch so far has been a disaster. Kemi, if you're watching, stop saying what you're going to do. You've been in the job a couple of months, you haven't done anything. Do something. Stop saying you're going to... You wait, we're really going to take Labour on. You wait. No, we don't want to wait. Get on with it.
It's all platitudes and headlines, isn't it? You know, I had this debate when I was hosting a week or two ago, and I said to Peter Barnes, I think, look, we need to see Kemi Badenoch's mettle. We need to know what she actually stands for.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is talk. 0344 499 1000 is where you'll find us. Just gone 10 to 3. The voice of doom is back. It's the political mystery voice. This thing's gone on for like this is the 7th day. Or is it the 8th day? 7th day of this. No one has got it so far. Have a listen to the voice.
I believe that so strongly.
I believe that so strongly. No one so far has managed to get anywhere close, which is unusual, because usually when we do these, even when we think they're a bit cryptic, they're a bit tough, bit difficult, someone somewhere knows it, but not on this one so far. Have a listen again.
I believe that so strongly.
Don't call in. There is no prize. You can message in if you want to have a crack at this, and if we get a right answer on inside the next 10 or 12 minutes, we will reveal all. If we don't, it rolls over again. Here's the voice.
I believe that so strongly.
Who is that? 87222 if you want to have a crack. Details on the way. Stuart's in Staffordshire on green energy. Stuart, how you doing?
Fine, thanks, Ian. How's yourself?
Very good.
I might be a little bit nervous.
You're sounding great so far, Stu. Fire away.
My point is that, of course, the British energy industry is a complete joke, and it certainly isn't green in the slightest.
Go on.
We've traded the power from coal to these intermittent systems, and they just don't work. You've got problems with windmills because windmill blades aren't recyclable, and there are thousands and thousands in America that are buried that are testament to that.
The blade graveyard.
Yes, indeed. There was a scheme by Veolia, the waste company, and they were looking to make shelters from the wind blades.
Yep.
But I don't know how far that's gone. The shafts of them obviously are made of steel, and that has a carbon dioxide. I'm not going to call it carbon because it's not. It's carbon dioxide implication. And of course, you've got a 100-ton lump of concrete and rebar in the ground that's never going to come out.
Mm-hmm.
So how green is that?
Well, we could go on as well. You've just listed a few things, and then as you know, the sheer expense of it, how certain products are mined, the transportation around the world of it, the carbon footprint, the weight of an electric car compared to a conventional. I mean, the list goes on, Stuart.
It certainly does, and what it is politicians, they're not lying, but what they've done is they've been misled by activists, and the activists have given them these lovely little PowerPoint presentations with a little factory over here and your home over here and little dotted lines, and say, oh, when Mrs. Jones isn't doing a washing at night, Mrs. Smith next door can charge a car. But the point is, Ian, if everybody goes to electric vehicles, then that lull that everybody talks about. Do you remember I can't think, the Contact 7, when you used to have the cheap electricity at night?
Yes, indeed. So same thing will happen here.
Economy 7, yeah, Economy 7. Well, what happens is, if everybody charges their electrical vehicles at night, it suddenly becomes a peak.
You blow the grid up, or it won't work.
And the point is, we can't supply because if the grid was good enough, and I'm a power plant operator, and I started in 1985 as a 19-year-old at Ruisley in Staffordshire.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still doing it. The point is, we only had one cable from France for interconnector for emergencies, for frequency and so on, frequency control and whatever. And now you've got 6 or 7 from France. You've got the Danish line, the Viking line, you've got the Norway line, and you've got other lines. I mean, they're even talking about banks of solar panels from the Sahara, I kid you not, to run a cable all the way up France to come up into southern Italy. I mean, it's sort of cheating, if you know what I mean, when we can... How can you power an infinite growth economy with windmills?
Well, I guess the only way is to put enough of them up, which means we won't see anything. We won't be able to drive, not because we can't afford the cars, but because the windmills will be in the roads.
Well, exactly. That's the thing is, my unit at Rugeley was 120 megawatts.
Yep.
These wind turbines are generally 3 to 4. So you're talking between 30 and 40 of them.
Wow.
Just to do 120 megawatts. And as you say, at what point do you say, hang on, we need room for houses and roads and other stuff?
Indeed, it's a good point. Listen, Stuart, I've got to move just because of time. You didn't sound nervous at all. You were a great call. Thank you, Stuart in Staffordshire. Text in from Steve. This is reference obesity. Interesting piece about obesity and surgery. He says, I had knee surgery about 3 months ago and the outcome was that I needed a new knee. However, the surgeon advised that I should lose some weight and then come back to him. And then he would be happy to do the surgery as the risks are much less. And the outcome was positive. And that was private healthcare. So they could just as easily take the money, but they don't. That's always reassuring to hear that. There's probably a lot of countries around the world, maybe the United States, that wouldn't do that. I was talking at the weekend, strangely enough, about dentistry to the same person I was talking to about this, and he was saying that in America, they lived in America for a while and had some dental checks and was told they needed God knows how much work, came back to the UK and didn't need any. It was just not required stuff, because the whole dental area, that's a mischievous beast, isn't it? Who the hell knows whether they need it? The dentist says you need a fill-in, you go, all right, OK, better have a fill-in then. But glad to hear, Steve, that the private sector didn't ride out on that possibility of, well, they might have had to have done it twice, I guess. We've got the voice of doom, hopefully a big reveal on the other side of the news. Nobody has got it so far. This is day 7. Have a listen to the voice.
I believe that so strongly.
Don't call in, there is no prize, but you can message in if you want to have a crack at that, 87222. We'll reveal all on the other side of the news in a few moments. We'll continue taking calls on the Robert Jenrick comments, the Green comments, Nigel Farage and who he does business with. And is the Green argument right after all? Now we hear about how our world is being energised. News coming next.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Yeah, good afternoon. 3 minutes after 3 o'clock. Welcome back to the home of common sense. Loads to get through in this section. We are still talking, of course, about the green argument. Wind apparently providing more electricity than ever last year. It overtook gas, which further means the UK moved further away from fossil fuels to power the nation. This is according to new data. So is the green argument right after all? We found some flaws in this data over the course of the last couple of hours. Also this afternoon, Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick has linked the grooming gang scandal to mass migration, criticising medieval attitudes towards women among some immigrants. Well, it's the most obvious point in the world to make. We've been making it for years. Robert Jenrick is now saying that. Thoughts on that? And a veteran jazz teacher has been cancelled by a prestigious music school after claiming there is no systemic racial inequality in the UK jazz scene. He was talking about his particular area. Some students didn't like what he said. He was out on his ear, mate. He was gone. This fella wasn't coming back anytime soon. More on that as well. Everything that you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. So Voice of Doom, Day 7. Have we got a winner? This was the voice, let me remind you.
I believe that so strongly.
Was it Jonathan Aitken? No. Lord Taylor? No. David Mellor? It wasn't. Nor was it Michael Foot. Cecil Parkinson? No. Ian Duncan Smith? No. It wasn't Norman Tebbit. Nor was it Jeffrey Archer. But Michael Howard? No. It wasn't him either. But we have got a right answer. Remember, there is no prize. Love to say it's 50k coming your way and half a Labrador, but sadly not. Toby in West Yorkshire, with the correct answer, it was former MP, now Lord, Chris Smith. You'll remember Chris Smith, notable for a number of reasons. He was part of Blair's inner sanctum, was the Culture Secretary for around about 4 or 5 years from the inception of the Blair government. He was the first openly gay British MP as well. Back in 1984, he came out, and that would have been a tricky time for a high-profile person, or anyone for that matter, still, even though it was the 80s. And then, of course, as you do when you've served your time under any government in cabinet, he's elevated to the House of Lords, and that's where he's been since about 2005. Chris Smith. Chris Smith, now Lord Smith. Well done to Toby in West Yorkshire. If anybody else got it, or if you were thinking it, congrats. But that was the first one that came through. Was that the only one, Adam, as well? I'm surprised that went on for 7 days. These things normally last a couple, which means tomorrow we have the task of finding an even more cryptic voice on the Voice of Doom. It will return at about 2:45 tomorrow on the programme. We'll do some more comments and calls from you in a couple of moments. I want to go back to the Robert Jenrick story. Mr Jenrick, of course, is a former immigration minister. He was standing against Kemi Badenoch to be the leader of the Tory party. Didn't quite make it. She did. But he now serves in her cabinet as the Shadow Justice Secretary. Well, he's been linking grooming gangs to mass migration. He says medieval attitudes towards women among some immigrants are responsible. He also criticised Keir Starmer for calling grooming gang inquiry advocates far-right bandwagoners, labelling the remark absolutely disgusting. Meanwhile, what could be the one piece of good news on all of this, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has said that those who cover up or fail to report child sexual abuse could face professional or criminal sanctions under a new offence to be introduced this year. That was one of the, I think there were 20 recommendations in the J inquiry. None of them have been implemented, and Baroness J, I think, was appearing on the media earlier saying actually what victims really want is the implementation, not more prolonged inquiries. Either way, that would be welcome news. Why did it take so long? The Tories didn't do it. Will Yvette Cooper deliver? Let's speak with Mike Neville, former Metropolitan Police Detective. Good afternoon to you, Mike. Nice to have you with us as ever.
Hello, Ian.
It's interesting that those in high places that covered this stuff up. I guess this new law or rule, whatever you call it, won't be retrospective, so there will be a lot of council leaders and social workers and the like, and maybe even law enforcement, sadly, that'll be breathing a sigh of relief knowing it ain't going to be me, Gov.
It's truly shocking, isn't it, Ian? And some of these people are still serving. I saw that a superintendent who downplayed the abuse in Telford is now an assistant chief constable at the College of Policing. You know, so somebody who downplayed it is now setting the standards of how police deal with incidents. Yeah. And as you say, there'll be all sorts of knighthoods and whatever else have been dished out to senior police officers and council leaders who literally allowed this to go on, who allowed, let's be frank about this, little girls to be raped and abused, and they did it because it would either impact on their career or cost them votes. It's absolutely appalling, and I'm really glad this has come out, because if this was 10 years ago, you'd be burned at the stake for racism, because racism is more serious than murder and child rape and anything else, as we well know, according to the attitudes of these people.
Yeah.
And I'm glad this is coming out now, because, and even Robert Jenrick seems to have had a Saul on his way to Damascus moment, doesn't he? That he's realised that immigration might always be good.
Yeah.
It's a pity that he didn't do something about it in the 14 years that the Tories were in power. So I think
100%.
the Tories and Labour.
Yeah, 100%.
Tories and Labour both guilty.
Absolutely right, and various bods in local authorities from all sorts of departments, and you rightly so. That this was. It's extraordinary, isn't it, given the way that the likes of Keir Starmer reacted to things like Black Lives Matter when a man was killed in the United States, and, you know, Starmer was down there on one knee. What you have here among the catalogue, the industrial scale abuse of mostly young white, almost exclusively young white girls, in addition to all of the obvious crimes of beating, abuse and rape and torture, kidnap, sometimes, you name it. You've also got race hate. I mean, these girls, many of them have testified. I was listening to one victim recently saying, regularly called, excuse the language, a white bitch, white trash, white slag. You know, you're a dirty piece of meat, that you're here for me. This was almost the dictionary definition of full-on racism in all of its ugly forms. And yet the very people that purport to advocate against this simply stayed totally quiet.
You see, you've got to try and get into their head, Ian, you see, because in the heads of the likes of Keir Starmer, only white people can be racist. So everybody else is a victim. If you're a straight white man, you have no victim points whatsoever. If you are a Muslim and do things, you can claim victim status. And this is the problem. In this country, we used to treat everybody equally and fairly. That's how the law should be. Then we started, under Jack Straw, the Macpherson report, this business of if somebody perceives racism. Yeah. This is like thought crime, like the Soviet Union. We used to deal with evidence and facts, and we used to be fair and judge everybody the same, which we should. That's the way we should be. If a black person's racist to a white person, that's racism. If a white person's racist to an Asian person, that's race. It's all racism. But what you find with the likes of the liberal left is that only white people can be racist, and this is the trouble. And these little girls have been sacrificed on the altar of multiculturalism because these people are obsessed with an idea, and the idea is more important than human lives. And as I said to you, it's wicked and evil, and I'm glad it's been exposed.
Yeah, it's interesting that the way it became exposed as well, or kind of re-emerged, because this story's been around, as you know, Mike, for 20 plus years. But now through unconventional means, I'm talking about Elon Musk, suddenly we're talking about it again, and that's maybe no bad thing in this respect, and the frustration.
And people like Maggie Oliver, junior officers who were prepared to speak out, who had bravery, who thought, I really don't care. I care more about little girls than I do about getting promoted. People like Maggie Oliver, she should be the senior police officer, not those who allowed it to go on. Yeah. And we see it all over. You don't have to look at the Tower Hamlets voting scandal and things like that. There's all sorts of crimes been allowed to go on because people are afraid of that accusation of being racist. And we need to clear this out of the way because society is fragmenting, and that is not a good thing for us.
Indeed. Listen, great to have you on, Mike. Thank you. Mike Neville, former Metropolitan Police detective. There would be... Look, I think it's great that, you know, you live in a country where people come from all sorts of different backgrounds and, you know, even if somebody is, you know, white and British, you know, they might have a grandparent who is Irish, or, you know, a grandmother who came from France, or, you know, there's all of these, you know, that's the planet Earth for you, right? I think all of that is great. I think most people of whatever background, most people pretty much broadly sing from a very similar hymn sheet, OK? And I think Ian Duncan-Smith made this point with Julia a little earlier. You know, you come to the table, all of us do, there's bits of your culture, there's bits of somebody else's culture, all of that is fantastic. I don't think anybody that's going to say... I mean, imagine if you applied it to cuisine and you said there's not going to be, you know, we're going to do away with curry or jerk chicken or pizza on the basis that it ain't British. I don't know what you'd be left with, a flipping sausage probably, but you take my point. So we embrace lots of facets and aspects, and I think most individuals do. And whether they are people in this country or whether it's Brits in other countries, that's sort of broadly how it's meant to work. But this one particular area, and I can think of no other group that has managed to do this so spectacularly without comment, would be those men that believed they lived in a sort of parallel set of laws and rules around their existence. They felt emboldened in their own community because most of the population of those communities were from the same background, including, you know, some politicians. And I know at a time when, you know, race relations were quite sensitive and all the rest of it, but that's no excuse for you don't go, well, it's a bit sensitive down there, so we better not go in and investigate that rape of little girls. I mean, that is literally what happened. And the more you hear about this story, and it is worth... I'm not going to apologise for repeating lots of stuff here, because it's worth repeating. It's such a big... It's such a huge, horrendous mark in our country's history that this should be front-page stuff all of the time. If you look at what used to happen, you know, in terms of the country we live in, I mean, Mike mentioned racism and the Macpherson report and the like. I mean, think about what it used to be like for somebody who wasn't white in the... You know, one of my best friends at school... One of my best friends, but genuinely one of my best friends at school was a black kid. Now, so we used to walk to school together. Nobody ever shouted anything at me. No one ever did anything to our windows or throw anything in our garden. But my mate Dave literally had that all the time. He grew up with that, and that's what the 70s and also into the 80s looked like. And you'd like to think, although there are still some stragglers at the back that haven't kept up, that although things are not perfect, and I think like any other form of criminality, I don't think anything ever becomes perfect, but you aspire to it, you give it a good go. Take football, for example. You know, the Show Racism the Red Card, these kind of initiatives, Kick Racism, all of those things have massively changed things. Again, caveat, not perfect, work in progress, I get it. But we leaps and bounds, and you'd think, therefore, that would be applicable everywhere. So the grooming gang story becomes even more mysterious. The fact that this was happening at a time when we were talking about harmonising race relations and the like. But there it was going on, and perhaps it was because of all of that that various people in authority thought, well, I better not investigate this one because someone might think we're a racist. I mean, it's crazy. It's just beyond belief that we can even report this story. And, you know, there is a rather grim suggestion that some of it is still going on as well. People still feel emboldened enough to continue. Let's talk to Christine in Blackpool on this very point. Christine, what are your thoughts? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I haven't, I will admit, I've never phoned up a station before at all, but I was so incensed by Starmer's comment yesterday about people like myself. He's calling me far right.
Yeah.
Now, I have a little bit of experience in the fact that I was abused as a child, and I took my abuser to court twice. And I do a lot of work, voluntary work now in safeguarding to prevent these things happening again.
Sure.
And for him to call me as a victim and survivor far right, it was so, I was incensed by it, because he hasn't used that comment as, you know, he's not saying that's a good thing, is he? He's not making out that being far right is a good thing. And the fact that he thinks he's got the right to call people like myself that have been through those sort of things, those sort of names, it's insensitive.
It's beyond incredible. Bearing in mind, Christine, look, I'm not doubting. Of course there are some dodgy racists who will jump on any bandwagon if they can have a pop at somebody who's not white. We all know that. But seriously, does he really think, even if he thought it, what a time to raise that? Bearing in mind, this whole issue came around because people felt they would be accused of being far right if they said anything. So there is Starmer parroting the very line that caused the trouble to start with.
Absolutely, absolutely. And he needs to think about what box he's putting us victims and survivors in. I mean, what box does he think he's putting us in by calling us names like that? It takes victims and survivors so much strength and courage to come forward to even say anything about what's happened to them. He has no idea how difficult that is and how much stress and pain it causes us. And then to call us names because of that.
And it's also...
For what reason?
What he's done is defined the argument by, you know, the worst possible kind of person. And I think, and I hate to say this because this is our Prime Minister, even if I don't rate the guy, but I think he's okay with what he said. I actually think he would say it again.
Yeah, because I think he thinks from some sort of ether from somewhere in the universe that he's going to get support from certain people by using that language.
Yeah. Because of course
those people that are going to support him for using that language, I wouldn't want to know them anyway.
I mean, it seems incredible that by definition of just calling or wanting there to be a more thorough inquiry, because the Baroness J report, you know, there were recommendations. There's been lots of inquiries. I understand that, and maybe it's not the right way. But if you call for one, then that doesn't make you far right. I mean, it's beyond belief. Bearing in mind, there's Labour members as well as victims, people like yourself, Maggie Oliver that we just mentioned with Mike Neville, people like that who are saying we need another inquiry, and apparently all of those people are therefore far right wagon. I can't even say.
Bandwagon.
Bandwagon is the word I was looking for. Bandwagon merchants that are all jumping on top of the same narrative. Listen, Christine, thank you. It's a very powerful call from Christine, who, through her own unfortunate experience, as well as I would imagine just being a sensible human being, feels angered enough to call a programme that she's never done in her life before. Thank you to Christine in Blackpool. 0344 499 1000.
Kemi Badenoch so far has been a disaster. Kemi, if you're watching, stop saying what you're going to do. You've been in the job a couple of months. You haven't done anything. Do something. Stop saying you're going to... You wait. We're really going to take Labour on. You wait. No, we don't want to wait. Get on with it.
It's all platitudes and headlines, isn't it? You know, I had this debate when I was hosting a week or two ago, and I said to Peter Barnes, I think, look, we need to see Kemi Badenoch's mettle. We need to know what she actually stands for.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
This one from Neil in Surrey, who says, what is the green argument and how could it be right or wrong? If you can concisely state what that is, then you might get a simple answer. Otherwise, forget it. Well, I think we're... I mean, there's a nuance in that and a slight tongue-in-cheekness about it, but the overarching green argument, Neil, in terms of... And I was talking specifically about windmills and solar panels. Is that green argument right after all, that is the way to energise our country? But Neil says, I say whatever we do to change the way we power our world, the Green lobby will want it done yesterday. And that is impossible and illogical. Stop net zero and start building nuclear power stations. This is all driven by bad science and bad actors with a political agenda. Yeah, I think you're right on a lot of that, Neil, certainly. And you're right, particularly, the Green lobby will want it done yesterday. And when it's done, it won't be good enough. I remember doing an interview. No, it wasn't an interview. I put out a tweet, this is years ago, about about London's cycle lane network, which was not nearly as big as it is now, but it was substantial. And I think TfL had just announced the plans, is possibly under Boris Johnson as well when he was mayor. And it was essentially, you know, north to south, east to west, there will be a way to go on two wheels like there's never been before. And I made this point that, you know, it's incredible. In fact, it was a positive comment that cyclists have got this incredible network. And a guy who I think was an environment editor on one of the national newspapers chipped in and had a right old pop at me. What are you talking about? This isn't good. This is terrible. This is terrible what we've got here. I thought, hang on a second. Half an hour ago, there were no cycle lanes. They've spent like 10 million squillion quid on cycle lanes, north to south, east to west, unrecognisable, and it ain't good enough. And I rather think that's the same here, and Neil in Surrey highlights that possibility, that even when done, they go, no, we got to go further. We haven't self-flagellated enough, which I think some of this argument rests on that unfortunate condition. Anthony is in Manchester on wind power. What's going on, Anthony? Afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
These figures, I think, this 29% for the wind, it's a little bit misleading in the fact that, I mean, I'm assuming this is an average over the year. So you could have 90% in May and 90% in June and 3% in December when you need it.
That's a good point. Yeah, you know, it's not happened literally every day.
Exactly. So it's I think it's a bit misleading.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, have you heard the German term like Dunkelflaut?
Dunkelflaut?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means a period of where no energy can be generated from wind or solar.
All right. Okay.
There's no storm.
There you go. The Germans have always got a convenient word for everything, right?
Yeah, well, they've been coping with it over the Christmas period because there's been low wind and low sun, so they're importing it obviously from Norway.
Yeah.
And Norway are playing it because their prices have doubled due to the cost of electricity being short. and they're threatening to cut off Germany and Denmark and us, you know, through the connectors.
Sure.
So
it's not I mean, it's this idea that you just look at a figure and then celebrate. I mean, I said at the beginning, I've got a funny feeling the story is a bit more complex and nuanced than just look, we've hit record amounts of. There's loads more to this, and you know, we've had brilliant arguments and comments on it. Anthony, thank you. Anthony in Manchester. One here from Caroline. This is reference the obesity question. I'm no saint but with my diet, but after my initial 1 coffee in the morning, the rest of the day is water or herbal tea. Only for me, absolutely no alcohol either. But people can buy fresh vegetables that they can microwave now, and some contain 2 to 4 different types of veg in a bag. Takes 5 minutes to heat up, no excuses. Now, as plenty of veg choice are out there. That's a very good point. That is a really good point, isn't it? I mean, yes, they always say, well, it's convenient and it's cheaper. And if you go to the real El Cheapo shop, you can buy a microwave meal for about 70p and stick that in the microwave. I mean, it's full of very bad things, one would assume. This one from Gurdeep, who says, there seems to be a misconception about the most obese. There are medical reasons why some are obese. I have an underactive thyroid, for example. I was put on so much weight, not through eating unhealthy foods, but because my metabolism is so slow, so not burning anything off. I've struggled for many years to lose weight, just not happening. I used to be very active, walked miles every day to and from work, gardening, etc. It's a fair point as well, Gurdeep. I'm willing to, absolutely delighted to highlight that cause, but I sense that it's probably a minority of people that are in that situation where their obesity is down to a medical condition. What I think is more likely now is it might be down to a mental health condition. We're living in a pretty bonkers world full of impenetrable nonsense and a labyrinthine world of daft initiatives, laws, rules, regulations, individuals, people. Everything's gone upside down on us. This is tomfoolery on on Class A drugs. It's a bizarre world, and then we got cost of living thrown into that as well, insecurity thrown into that too. You can absolutely see why somebody comes home from work when they're not feeling brilliant and doesn't want to cook themselves a full-on spread of healthy food, rather nip to the chippy on the way home and wash it down with a nice can of Coke. I mean, who can't see that? I can see that. So unless everybody's got this collective willpower, we're going to be there forever in that situation, or something's going to change. What is likely to change? I mean, have you ever thought by now, when I'm listening to this new Facebook initiative, where they're going to do away with the fact checker and sort of open up Facebook, so, I don't know, to what? What are they saying? We're going to open up Facebook to more what kind of content? Because there's previously been problems with the fact checker. The fact checker seemed to be almost a, not so much a fact checker, but an algorithm that got rid of news or comment that they didn't like very much. That was always the accusation of Twitter. Although personally, when Twitter was accused of being very left-wing, I never noticed it. When it's now accused of being more right-wing, I haven't noticed it. I looked the other day, just checked on my timeline, and the first tweet I got up was from Owen Jones, and the second one was from George Galloway, which is interesting. And I look at it now, and I think pretty much the same thing is happening. I'm not seeing a deluge of right-wing nutty stuff. I see some of that on there, but I always saw some of that on there, like I see left-wing nutty stuff. My point about Facebook and Twitter, between them, it's almost now we're living... it is a parallel planet Earth that we've got going on. I know it's always been a little bit of that. It's not like it's the alternative or the new mainstream. It's a deeply disturbing, dark place. So the digital world is sort of running concurrently with the rest of us. So then you've got misinformation and you've got to sift through it to know whether it's... So yeah, the fact that somebody chows down on a bag of chips of an evening, I totally get that. 0344 499 1000. It's 3:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 25 to 4. So let's look at this story, which we loosely mentioned a little earlier. The veteran jazz teacher fired from a prestigious music school for claiming there is no systemic racial inequality in the UK jazz scene. Speaking exclusively to Talk, Martin Speak, a saxophonist for more than 50 years, alleges he was forced to resign for providing feedback questioning Trinity Laban's diversity policies. In the feedback via email, he claimed he didn't believe black musicians were underrepresented in the UK, but rather have far more opportunities than others. He spoke to Mike Graham earlier today.
I shared it with one student, an interesting student who we always chatted about all kinds of things, and I thought that's what you're supposed to do in the academic world with young adults, talk about interesting subjects. You know, you don't have to agree. And he shared it with a half dozen students, and one of those got anxious. I don't like what Martin's saying here, and went into the head of jazz, who was a friend of mine for 30 years, interestingly, and instead of calling me in, let's all talk about it, bypassed me, and the wheels of motion were set. And the students then heard about the email, although I hadn't seen it, and decided to boycott my lessons.
So there it is. We did reach out to the music and dance school for comment, the Trinity Laban Conservatoire. We contacted them. We await to hear. Let's speak with Ebbs Akintade, the broadcaster, who often helps us out on interesting issues such as this. Ebbs, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Ian. Hello, how are you?
Good to have you with us. Well, listen, I mean, it's a curious one, this, because this fellow was asked for his opinion, and he gave his opinion, and when they gave his opinion, they didn't like his opinion, then said, well, you know, makes it rather hard for you to teach now, and nobody turned up to his lectures. What is going on here?
Well, this is one of those things, because of the uber-sensitive times that we're in, as we all know, post-pandemic, post-whatever it is, Trump town coming back in again, we're all so sensitive to other people's points of view. So I know it's interesting to hear that interview with Mike Graham. He sent it to one person, and then it obviously dominoed and spread like some kind of pandemic amongst that year or that class. So then that probably wasn't his original intention, but I do think because of the life and times that we're in, because Trinity Laban is in Greenwich, you know, part of Greater London, we are such a diverse city. We're proud of that, and it's important not to come up with statements like that, because even though there might be his opinions, that kind of strays slightly away from him teaching jazz and saxophone. He's done that for 50 years. Yeah. And he's now put his own career in an extreme position now and under scrutiny because of one point of view, because of one email that he sent to one student. You can't do that now. I don't think you can. I think it's all right to have these kind of conversations, maybe on a one-on-one basis, and be mindful of the audience. But to put it in writing,
what was he supposed to do, though? I mean, if you look at, because I think his overarching point, I mean, if you looked at the music industry, certainly music that my kids listen to, or my elder kid, my nearly 11-year-old listens to, which is mostly black, not white. If I look at the sports stars he follows, they're mostly black, not white. I mean, but sticking with music, I mean, it's an area that, of all careers of life where there might be big gaps in diversity, you wouldn't certainly initially think that the music industry was one of them. And in fact, you might even argue that there's a sort of an over-representation proportionally in many areas of music, and jazz might well be one of them. So he was just merely answering a fact, wasn't he?
Well, no, not exactly. I do think it's a bit of a sweeping statement to say that black musicians were underrepresented. He doesn't think that black musicians are underrepresented in the UK. You know, to say that is too much of a sweeping statement. Unless you've got some kind of a factual analysis behind it, it's really difficult to say statements like that, because you are inevitably going to annoy or put off a certain group of society.
But isn't that their fault, not his fault? I mean, if I said to you yesterday, Ebbs, you know, do you think black musicians are underrepresented in the UK? What do you think your answer would have, instinctively, without looking into the data, what do you think instinctively your answer would have been?
Genuinely, my answer would have been, I think there's been a period when there has been underrepresentation, but diversity is coming in and things are changing. That would have been my answer. I think underrepresentation is in every single sphere of society in some way, shape or form, whether it's disability, whether it's race, whatever the protected characteristics.
Class is the big one, of course.
And class is the big one.
Doesn't really get much oxygen in these arguments.
But when you're saying that in a classroom, in a well-known school like Trinity Laban, which is in such a diverse city as London, you are running the risk of running through fire and harming your own career by saying that, especially in an email.
Do you think, though, is it possible, though, sorry, Ebbs, to talk over you, but I was just going to say, is it possible that Mr. Speak, the man concerned, you know, he's worked here for some time, he knows the students, I'm guessing, and I don't know, but I concur with what you say, Ebbs, that given where the school is, it probably has a very mixed group within of students that are there. So he probably felt confident that he could trust people with that view, because it was his own opinion based on what he thought was an intelligent analysis of his experience.
And that's fine, but I think you have to use a certain element of caution, because to say that to a student, even another member of staff, is in an email can be quite a difficult thing to do, because you leave yourself open to all kinds of ramifications, like the students avoiding his class, like his latest album being halted, like having to step down as lead saxophonist at the London Jazz Orchestra. All these things happen as a direct result of just one simple action, which in hindsight, you probably think nothing of it, and 10 years ago you could have done that, but now you cannot.
But that is, I mean, you're right. I mean, he might be sitting there now going, oh, man alive, I wish I hadn't done that because I've lost all my stuff. But ultimately, he should be able to do that. That's the argument, isn't it? He should be able to do that, and anyone that's crying over it should be taken into a room and said, look, you know, we don't want to upset anybody here, but you're a half-wit and he's not. He's right, and because it's his opinion.
Well, yes, that's the point. It's his opinion. It's not a matter-of-fact opinion. It's not even necessarily fact. It's his opinion. I do think...
it's anecdotal, but based on his experience, one would assume.
Yes, based on his experience, but we can't. We almost have to censor ourselves now. It's not just a case of what we say on social media. You mentioned X earlier and other forms of social media. You've just got to be almost censoring yourself. I know it's not a great thing to say, but just in terms of being cancelled, we live in a cancel culture, and that cancel culture has grown bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And he is now running the high risk of being completely cancelled from not just his job at Trinity Laban, but as a lead saxophonist, and it's going to be tainted by one simple email. I know it's easy to say it now, it's happened, but for future reference for other people, it's probably best to keep your opinions to yourself, unless you have hard facts to back it up.
Or should we, you know, as free speech warriors, that I'd like to think you and I are, Ebbs, and, yes, you know, dashing young men and all the rest of it that we are, but in addition to that, we advocate free speech. Should that not be the emphasis of these arguments, that we want to overthrow this sort of craziness, this, you know, people wrapped in cotton wool, that they're going to be upset because they disagree with somebody?
Yeah, you mentioned people wrapped up in cotton wool. This Gen Z generation are more sensitive than most, and so they're going to be more reactive than most other people. And due to social media, due to their talent at spreading whatever they see, or video or otherwise, that was also another reason to not send an email to one person, because inevitably it's going to go to other people. And then the backlash is going to follow, because not everyone follows the same opinion as yourself. So in that case, it's probably best keeping your opinions to yourself and just stick to teaching music. It sounds quite basic and black and white, but if you don't, you do run the risk of harming your own career.
Or do we just put all Gen Zers in jail? There's the answer, Ebs. Then we can start. I don't know how many prisons we'd have to build for that, but it's a nice idea. Listen, Ebs, always good to get your view. Thank you. That's Ebs Akitade, the broadcaster. I've only spoken to him 1,000 times. Thank you to Ebs. You might not agree with what Ebs said there. And you might be thinking, actually, he's at the wrong end of the telescope. I think he's at the wrong end of the telescope on this. It's down to, surely, look, if your opinion is so vile and dangerous and you've come out with something when you have a responsibility in your role that is like, for example, if you were to make some kind of slightly crazy, I don't know, stereotypical or generic comment and you were a surgeon, then you might see why that could be tricky for the individual. But I don't think that's what we're dealing with here. This is something we're going to discover about Martin that we don't know about, and I doubt it. It seems extraordinary to me that we would be in this place. So Ebbs's advice is, even if you're right, just don't say it, because you might have trouble on your hands, and that's exactly what's happened to the music teacher. Thank you to Ebbs. More comment from you on the way. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. This is Talk.
Grateful for anything that brings this back onto a national public platform, because it is such a monumental failure of decades in this country. So anything that draws us back into these issues, for me, is worthwhile. I think what we have to be careful of, though, Julia, is that we don't deflect from the central issues of this, which is children being raped and being failed by the authorities.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is talk.
It's 10 to 4. Jeremy Carl's here with Drive after the news at 4, but he will nip in for a bit of a chat about what's happening on the show. Let's go to your calls. This is Steve in God's own town of Scunthorpe. How are you, Steve?
I'm okay, thanks. I know you're quick. His email was prompted by somebody putting their opinion. Now, he wrote his opinion.
Yep.
So why does one opinion trump another opinion?
I don't know.
The other thing is, if he's a teacher and his students don't turn up, then so be it. They don't turn up. He could stand there every day in the class. If they don't turn up, that's up to them. He's in his profession because how competent he is, I assume, in teaching.
Do you think... What about the point that our last guest made, Ebbs, that when he said that actually, even if you think something, we live in a weird world now, just don't say it in case this stuff happens?
No, I don't believe that. I believe you say how you feel.
Yeah.
And if somebody wants to have a conversation about it, then talk through it with them.
But even if you did upset some people and they weren't happy with what you said, I mean, losing your career is a bit much, isn't it? I mean, there's no courtroom in the land that would sentence you to that.
Of course there is, because it is one's personal opinion, and if you upset other ones, sorry, people phoning in or whatever, you're upsetting a lot of other people.
Yeah.
So why can one set of people not be upset, another set, fine, they can be. I just don't understand it.
I'm with you. Listen, I get it. Steve, thank you very much indeed for that. Steve in Scunthorpe. This comes in from Chris in Brighton. Regarding the cancellation of the music teacher, if it is now impossible to speak and think freely for fear of being on the wrong side of the baying mob, a mob that has the power to destroy you, then we're living under fascism. But you see, the problem, Chris, with that is that those that are advancing this kind of weird, messed up thinking believe they're doing something supremely good. So to them, if you don't fit within their ideal model of what a world should look like and how things should function, how institutions and organisations and businesses should operate and conduct their affairs, if you don't sit within the parameters or the template of those places, then you might as well be Chairman Mao or Saddam Hussein. So you don't lose any sleep over someone losing their job because that person or their thinking was surplus to requirements in the first place. You know, you would extrapolate from that. Half those students probably think this man is up there with Eugene Terre-Blanche when it comes to acts of racism now. And that's how people satisfy themselves, with having mad or bad or just completely misplaced opinions. They have a complete, unadulterated sense of rightness. And not just correct factually, but actually morally correct. And there's the problem, because this is not just a case that the man is wrong on what he said, he's morally wrong. And the imposition of being morally wrong is enough for him to lose his job. It's what has to happen when you're in a war. And that's how these kind of people see it. Thank you to Chris in Brighton. Dan in Tunbridge, the poor teacher only questioned a statement from the principal that there were not enough opportunities in jazz for black people. Why does that statement go unchecked? Self-censorship only works one way. And again, even if, because some might say, I heard somebody say, well, it's a bit of a stereotype to think, well, it's jazz, so therefore there's going to be lots of black people, lots of black musicians in a jazz band. So I get that, and you might go, do you know what, we crunched the numbers, and oddly, there isn't, actually. There's an underrepresentation. In fact, there's more South Asians than there are Afro-Caribbean people in that world. Maybe that's the conclusion. And the music teacher was wrong. OK, fine. He can put his hand up and go, do you know what, I didn't know that. My experience was the opposite, but I'm seeing it through the wrong eyes, so I'm wrong. I still don't see why he'd lose his job over it. James is in Kent. Back to the green energy debacle. James, what do you got for us? Hi.
Yeah, well, I'm not in the Garden of England, sadly, Ian. I'm just about to arrive at my father's house in Ayrshire in Scotland.
Oh, there you go. So you've come a long way since you first called then, or
well, no,
maybe you were never there. Listen, yeah, you're in a jet.
I said this morning. Anyway, just briefly, Chris, I think has a point there, because Chairman Mao and Hitler and people like that thought they were doing the right thing for their country.
100%, yeah.
Anyway,
100%.
moving on. The green thing, Donica was sort of swanking away about, wind being up at 30%. It's quite easy to get the wind and solar up if you close down all your other sources of power, because this was the energy produced in the UK.
Yeah.
And, of course, we import loads of it, and most of that comes from gas or nuclear or coal.
Correct,
or oil.
yes. It's not coming from windmills or panels.
So they can twist the numbers any way they like and say, wind's a great future now.
Yes, if you have fewer oil-producing plants, then naturally you're going to artificially change the stats so there's more wind.
Exactly.
Yeah, simple
and
as
that's
that.
pretty much what the Greenies do all the time. They twist the stats to make it suit their agenda.
There it is. Great call. James, say hi to your dad as well. Thank you for that. This one from Bex. Good afternoon. Margaret in Tunisia here. I think the Gen Z idiots need to grow up. Who are the adults in the room? Enough of this nonsense. Fair point. Bill in Romsey, wind, gas, electric, solar and nuclear, all good. What really matters is the cost to every household. And I'm not seeing bills coming down. You know, where's the kind of evangelists, the Ed Miliband frats, are going nuts over this nearly 30% of wind. It outdid gas. Was great, but is your energy price cheaper? Is it cheaper?
Duck.
You got a duck, love?
Yes.
What's happened?
I've got a duck.
Jeremy Carl's on his knees, not for the first. Well, sometimes you have to make that journey into this studio.
How are you, dear?
I'm all right. Yes. How are you?
Good. Got through yesterday's show. Voice survived.
It's sounding
Chinese
better.
medicine is working. I thank Ben, my driver, who's a wonderful Chinese man, and he gave me this Chinese medicine, which is tasted sort of a cross between marzipan and dog poo, if I'm being completely honest. I don't quite know how I would
But
ever
it's
know
working.
that. We're getting there.
Wow.
So there will be now the chance for me to go to work and not be at home and you to go and see the wife.
See, I knew this wouldn't end well for me.
No. You introduced me as Orson Welles just then. How are you? How are
I'm
you?
all right. Yeah, it's good. What's going on?
I just want to ask you, because you strike me... You're like the thinking woman's crumpet, is how you describe it. And I consider you probably the most intelligent one of my colleagues here. You know this grooming scenario?
Yes.
And there was this inquiry, and these were never implemented, and now, quite rightly, everybody's saying blah, 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 and Starmer's put his foot in it and said everybody who wants this is far right, which is ludicrous.
Yeah.
I have a feeling in my guts that this goes much higher than anybody can possibly imagine. And this is actually... People use the word national scandal, but the more you read about this, you think... Is this much more than we're being told and is being covered up? I don't know. Just a gut
Well, there is a
feeling.
sense, because bearing in mind it involves sort of not just one government, sort of 2 or 3 different governments. The same thing happened.
So why hasn't anybody done anything about it?
Yeah. And why would Keir Starmer not stand up and actually address, it's not even the elephant in the room, the thing that's staring at us, what's gone wrong with certain parts of certain communities? Why would he not say that? Why would he choose to talk about the bandwagon and the far right and not go, do you know what? People need to have a word
Because if we're being really honest, the areas that have been talked about are heavily Muslim-populated areas.
Yep.
And as was proven at the last election, he needs that vote.
He needs that vote.
And listen, it isn't just Keir Starmer. Why did the Tories do nothing about
100%?
That policy, that report that was made all those years ago? There's something to me that could be far more to this. And I'll tell you a story off air, which I literally can't tell you about on air, that makes me think that is the case. But anyway...
And didn't Boris Johnson, at a different place, when asked about a child abuse inquiry, talking about... And he used the term spaffing money up the wall when asked about it. Or do we want to... Yes, he used that term.
Yeah, because in the world I come from, you look after 2 people more than anything, kids and pensioners.
Correct.
And this government can be criticised about the pensioners, but I think many governments, looking back, can be criticised. We got Robbie Moore, the Conservative MP for Keighley and Ilkley. He's campaigned for an inquiry.